Okay, if I can get council members to the dais. Okay, good evening and welcome to the Lompoc City Council meeting. This is Tuesday, March 20th, 2018. It is 6:30 p.m. I'd like to remind everyone, if you have not done so yet, to turn off or silence your cell phones. Madam Clerk, we have roll call, please.
Councilmember Vega.
Here.
Councilmember Starbuck.
Present.
Councilmember Mosby.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Janelle Osborne. Here. Mayor Bob Lingle.
Here. If I get everyone to rise, remove your hats, and join Pastor Puntar in our invocation.
I bid you greetings on this rainy night. Let us come before God in prayer. O God of new beginnings, we gather here this night to reflect on the new life emerging outside of these walls. We rejoice in the freshness of the coming of spring, with buds sprouting and the earth popping to life. Each bud, each stalk pushing its way up out of the earth reminds us that no situation is too far gone or too dead for you to work within. The natural process of rebirth in spring helps us to know that you have built renewal into the very creation around us. Oh God, we have all faced situations in which we have felt the life drain out of us. Each one of us needs to experience the renewal and rejuvenation that spring symbolizes and proclaims, and that is available to us from you, loving God. Work within the dead places in our lives and in our neighborhoods and in our community, so that joy, strength, and hope push their way up. I ask for your wisdom to be with this city council this night, and I pray for your blessing to be upon all gathered here. I ask for your help to be with all in our community. Honor those who seek to lead with compassion and justice and fairness. Help them to hear the voices of concerns and to especially listen for those without a voice. These things we ask in humility and in gratitude. Amen.
Amen. Please remain standing and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. City Manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. I'd like to share with you that the Old Town Transit Transfer Center has been completed, and that looks very nice. Starting April 2nd, we'll have our new route established and started to serve that area. The Lompoc, JPL, NASA, and Vandenberg Air Force Base have officially announced that the Lompoc Airport is the official viewing site for InSight mission to Mars. So please come out and join us for that launch at the airport in Lompoc. And last but not least, I'd like to invite Jasmine McGinty up to share with you some recent news that we received on our economic development activities.
Thank you, Mayor Lingle, members of the council. Thank you for having me tonight. I just wanted to present an award that we just received from CalEd, which is the California Association for Local Economic Development. Last week was their annual training conference, and Economic Development Committee and Economic Development Division won an award in economic development partnerships. So for the Pathways to Preparedness event that they held in September 2017. So the partnerships category honors development projects between public and private sector that exemplify the spirit of partnership during 2017. So we did win an award for that between the partnership between the EDC, the City of Lompoc, the Lompoc Valley Chamber of Commerce, Allen Hancock College, and the Santa Barbara County Workforce Development Board. So that summit that we put on targeted business owners, leaders in education, and community members interested in workforce development to come together to highlight and build pathways for the students to successfully transition into the workforce. So I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you, guys.
Okay, we're going to move on to the consent calendar. We'll start with public comment on the consent calendar. It's your opportunity to speak to us for up to 3 minutes on anything on the consent calendar. Seeing no one rise, we're going to close public comment on the consent calendar, bring it to the council. The consent calendar generally consists of things that are considered routine and will be passed with one motion and one vote by the council unless a council member chooses to pull an item. Does any council member wish to pull an item? Okay, we will not. For the record, Madam Clerk, I'm going to be voting no on item number 6 and item number 7. Okay, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I move to approve consent calendar.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Let's vote. That passes 5-0. Thank you. Okay, staff presentations.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Just real quickly, I wanted to remind the council that the planning staff is in full force as far as advertising, promoting the draft zoning ordinance. We're having our first meeting on the 28th of March. We're calling it an open house. Essentially what the open house is welcoming the public to come in to this room, actually, look at our zoning code, look at some informational posters, and get a short presentation. In addition to that, we're already looking forward to the next meeting. We're looking at April 16th for a workshop. Again, this month we're calling it open house. It's more informal. But next month, I wanted to find out if the council would be open to a workshop on Monday, April 16th. We could start it at 6, we could start it at 6:30. But I just wanted to bring that up and find out if that would be a day that would work for the council so that we can start planning for that.
Okay, I will be in Washington, D.C. that entire week.
Okay. Anyone else, or?
That date is open for me.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Oh, okay. Oral communication. This is your opportunity to speak to us for up to 3 minutes on any item that can come before this council.
Deb Andrews, Mission Hills. I support building affordable housing in Lompoc. Why have approved housing projects not been built in Lompoc, and why hasn't the affordable housing shortage been addressed? A look at our neighbors may be instructive. Guadalupe tax revenue last year was $2.42 million. Expenses, however, were $3.38 million, a $1.5 million deficit. At the same time, the Guadalupe City Council approved the sale of a Cabrillo EDC affordable housing project to a nonprofit, People's Self-Help Housing. Cabrillo would have paid the city $933,000. People's Self-Help will pay the city $515,000. Tenancy in this new affordable housing project is limited to farm workers. People's Self-Help Housing will apply for $12 million in tax credits from the state to build this affordable housing for farm workers in Guadalupe. In Montecito, construction and building rules have been relaxed to facilitate speedy repairs to housing of the rich and famous damaged by the mudslides. Increasingly, low and middle income citizens are pushed to the streets and the riverbed if they experience a setback. Farm workers and the rich are preferred classes. Sanctuary city and state laws have been created to protect criminal non-citizens. 64-year-old Kenneth Humphrey of Sanctuary City, San Francisco, has spent the past 8 months in jail due to his inability to come up with bail set at $350,000. His alleged crime? Stealing $5 and a bottle of cologne from a neighbor in a senior housing project. Kenneth Humphrey did not benefit from Sanctuary City protections. 100 years ago, communists purged the independent peasantry, kulaks, by rounding them up and transporting them out of town on carts. The elimination of the independent and industrious from California is accomplished by means of a much more complex and expensive system. Failing schools, lack of affordable housing, high taxes, particularly the increasing gas tax, water storage projects sidelined despite recurring drought, and protections for criminal non-citizens. Perhaps we should declare Lompoc a sanctuary city for citizen kulaks and nullify Sacramento laws meant to purge independent and industrious citizens from California. I urge you to facilitate the construction of affordable housing in Lompoc.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else? Okay.
Hello, my name is Jacob Garcia. I would just like to add on to the previous topic that this woman was discussing. I think something that, again, and I brought it up at a previous city council meeting, is I think that we should look into providing a citywide broadband internet service. It would bring a good amount of revenue to the city. It would help us get out of debt. And the way that would work is pretty much we would lay down what's called fiber optic cables. Fiber optic cables are basically the highest speed internet that's pretty much possible right now, and the only thing that the city needs to do is, because all of the groundwork is done, all we have to do is pay a company to pull the wire throughout the city, and it can start off with any section of the city. We can actually pick a zone and district to provide this city broadband internet service, offer it at cheaper rates with much higher speeds than the internet service providers that are providing our internet service here in Lompoc, and it would create an upward stream and an effect in technological advances here in Lompoc. It would actually also help create more jobs here in Lompoc, because we would have someone who needs to maintain these connections. Now, the way this would work is it would be a lot like setting up electricity. Once it is set up and once it's underground, we need to make sure that someone keeps it up and running and that it is functioning, and cables may or may not need to be pulled out of the ground, and it would effectively create a whole new branch of city jobs that can be provided to everyone here in Lompoc. And it would also bring in a lot of revenue, because if we are offering it at a very good deal price for our citizens here, maybe $70 a month for a gigabyte speed per second. Now, to put that into perspective, again, a gigabyte is a very large amount of data to download per second. Most of our data that we download here, whether it's games, whether it's for your businesses, it's in the megabytes. A gigabyte is 1,000 megabytes. So this would effectively create an upward stream for Lompoc to be able to grow and expand and be able to compete with Santa Barbara, because honestly, we are a diamond in the rough, and I am tired of being known as the city that does everything for Santa Barbara, the city that walks their dogs, the city that cleans their toilets. I'm tired of hearing that. I want to hear growth here in Lompoc. I want to hear something here in Lompoc that we can be proud of as citizens, something that we can attach to, and something that we can all look at each other and say, wow, I am proud to live in this city. This is something that I want to work for.
Thank you very much, sir.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I want to bring to your attention that 2 weeks ago, I wrote an email for public comment. In the email, I did not address it specifically to the city council, but in the first sentence, it was addressing the city council. In the subject line of that email, I put public comment, cannabis, /youth centers, March 6, 2018. I submitted that public comment, written comment and request for public comment on the day of the council meeting. And when I arrived here at City Hall, I was noticed that my public comment was not made available to the public. And I didn't mention anything about it that night because I wasn't aware of everything all the facts pertaining to it, so I didn't mention anything. There was also a letter that came in that was addressed specifically to the city council, in which it had no mention whatsoever that it wanted to bring it up for public comment. Yet it was made available at the back table for public comment. My email, which addressed the city council on a number of issues that came before the council 2 weeks ago, was not forwarded to any of you or provided to the public until after the city attorney instructed her to forward it to you. I think that we're not getting a fair shake here, that we're not getting fair treatment here, and I feel that she's abusing her position as a city clerk. And I understand that she's not under your supervision or your hiring or firing authority, but she is under the city managers. And I think it's time that perhaps we look at making the city clerk's position an elected position, so that somebody doesn't come and sit here for a decade and get comfortable, make it partisan, and not give everyone a fair shake. There's no reason why my comments shouldn't have been included as public comment. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out who it was addressed to and what it was about. I want to see everybody be treated fairly and equally here. I don't know if I'm being discriminated against by her because of my position on cannabis, because of comments that I've made against certain individuals here in the city government, or because I'm a homosexual. But either way, I feel like I'm being discriminated against, and it's not right. I think everybody should have a fair shake here, and everybody should be respected. They certainly shouldn't be regarded as a minion. And that's my understanding of what Miss Stacy Haddon refers to me here at City Hall. And I'm upset about this, and I want something done.
Okay, thank you. I want to remind everyone that public comment is exactly that. We don't get up here and attack an individual. Comments can be made about certain things that happen. There's certain things that don't happen. But if it happens again, I'll have to cut that person off if we start attacking individuals. That's not what this is all about. Anyone else? Okay. Seeing no one rise, we're going to close oral communication and go on to item number 9, which is City Council appointments, or council appointments to the Economic Development Committee. We have 8 positions that are up, 7 at large, and 1 associate position. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And it just so happens that we have 8 applicants. So if I could get someone to, Ms. Osborne.
I'd like to move that the first 7, Christina Mercer, Henry Galena, Dwayne Holmdahl, Kathy Froming, Jeremy Ball, Christopher McIntyre, and Megan Raff be appointed to these 7 at-large positions, and the last name, Barbara Edwards, given it was the last application come in, given the 1 associate position.
Okay. Do I have a second on that?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, let's vote. And that passes 5-0. Any of these individuals here tonight? Mr. Galena, would you like to say anything, or? Thank you. Well, we want to thank you for your service. Okay, we'll move on now to item number 10, which is council appointment of 2 representatives to the western area of the Santa Ynez River Valley Groundwater Basin. This is a new position. Susan.
Thank you, Mayor Lingle. Mayor Lingle, council members, ladies and gentlemen. On December 6, 2016, the City Council adopted resolution number 608316 to form a groundwater agency for the western management area of the Santa Ynez River Valley Groundwater Basin. And the council authorized the manager to sign the memorandum of agreement for formation of the agency. The members of the Western Management Area are Santa Ynez River Water Conservation District, Mission Hills Community Services District, Vandenberg Village, Community Services District, and the city. The Santa Barbara County Water Agency is a party to the memorandum of agreement. However, it is not a voting member and has no financial responsibility. Section 4.8 of the memorandum of agreement creates a groundwater agency committee. For the groundwater agency, voting is weighted, and it's weighted according to population as well as ag interest. The San Ynez River District has 4 votes. The city has 2. Vandenberg Village and Mission Hills each have 1. Tonight, you are being asked to appoint a representative and 1 alternate. Those individuals will vote on resolutions, bylaws, policies on behalf of the city to implement the Groundwater Sustainability Act, and this is a mandated act from the state. And the appointment of the city's representative and the alternate does not have any fiscal impact to the city. You did approve budgeted cost and revenue towards the groundwater agency in the current budget. Staff is recommending the council appoint 1 council member and 1 alternate staff member to serve on the Groundwater Sustainability Agency of the Western Management Area of the San Ynez River Valley Groundwater Basin.
Is there any questions? Okay, on this item, we do not have public comments. We'll just bring it to the council. First, I'll ask, is any council member interested in serving on this? Councilmember Mosby.
I would be interested.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, then I'll make a motion to appoint Councilmember Mosby as the council member to this agency.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Let's vote. And that passed 5-0. But also, since we need to appoint a staff member, Ms. Zavolta has been working on this for a while, so I'd like to make a motion to appoint Susan Zavolta to this position as a staff member.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, let's vote. Okay, that's 5-0.
Thank you.
Okay, congratulations. And Mr. Mosby, congratulations. Okay, public hearing item number 11. Consideration of Planning Commission's recommendation to approve general plan amendment and zone change for the Community Health Centers project, adoption of resolution 6165(18), and introduction of ordinance number 6147(18). And this is Mr. Helverson. Do I see him? Ah.
Trying to get the slideshow up. I don't know if anyone could help. I clicked on it, but it didn't come up. That's okay. You do have a hard copy of my presentation tonight, and if we get the slideshow running in just a minute, we can go from there. As mentioned, Mayor, members of the council, item number 11 is a general plan amendment zone change for the Community Health Center project. If we have the slide up, but you do have a copy of the slides with you, the site is located at the southeast corner of West Ocean Avenue and South U Street. That property currently is vacant, and it's 5.18 acres. Currently, it's 2 lots. And around that property, just to kind of familiarize everyone with the site, you have the Oceanwood Apartments to the west. To the east, you have a commercial center, the West Side Shopping Center. To the north, you have a condo development, and to the south, a condo development as well. Right now, the surrounding destinations of that land and the existing we'll start with the existing general plan is medium-density residential, and the current zoning is medium-density residential plan development. The site has planned commercial development directly to the east, the shopping center that I just mentioned. Just to give a little bit of background about the request tonight, it did already go to Planning Commission on February 14th. At that Planning Commission meeting, they approved a development plan and a lot line adjustment. If you look at I apologize for the public, they don't have the slides are not coming up, but the second slide in your packet shows the lot line running north and south. The Planning Commission considered and approved a lot line adjustment to run east and west. Also, a mitigated negative declaration was done for the environmental review, and after that meeting on the 14th, the Planning Commission recommended approval of a general plan and zone change for that property located at 1220 and 1300 West Ocean. Again, I apologize that the slides, we don't have them, but in your packet, you will also see, I think it's important to know that if you approve this general plan amendment and zone change, there's a site plan drawing in your packet that shows a proposed 28,000 square foot medical clinic, also surrounding landscaping and parking as well. The north side, I mentioned that the lot line was adjusted to run east and west. On the north side, it was analyzed as part of the environmental review that a retail commercial center would be located on the north, but was not reviewed yet. It was just conceptual for environmental review purposes. You also see some elevation drawings in your packet of that medical clinic. And just to recoup on or not recoup, but reiterate for the environmental review, as part of the mitigated negative declaration, there were some environmental impacts relating to noise and biological resources, but those were able to be brought down to a level of not significant with mitigation measures attached to the project. One thing that was brought up at the Planning Commission regarding this project, and they were a little concerned that if, in fact, the general plan amendment and zone change was approved, would that affect our RHNA numbers? RHNA, essentially, you know, is Regional Housing Needs Allocation. Even if this was approved tonight, we still have a surplus of 1,780 units, and then we added another 44 with the Summit View Homes annexation, bringing that up to 1,824 units. So we could still meet our RHNA, and our RHNA allocation is actually 527 units, and we've already started dwindling that down to 400, I think, and 2, which was in your annual report this evening. Lastly, as part of the council report, it talks about fiscal impacts as a result of this proposal. No general fund resources were used to process the application. Obviously, we do a time and materials and we recoup our costs. But the applicant, which is here this evening, has brought up the fact that the Community Health Center organization is a nonprofit and that they would file an exemption from property tax. So we thought that was important to bring up to you tonight. At the same time, staff has researched a potential to get those taxes back through something called pilot or payment in lieu of taxes. That would be a special agreement that would need to, the applicant would need to agree, and then the council would have to approve that for the property. Lastly, as you know, as part of your recommendation, this is a general plan amendment and zone change to change that property from medium density residential to general commercial. And that's again 5.18 acres, and change the zoning from a medium density residential plan development to planned commercial development, or provide other direction to staff. That does conclude my presentation this evening, and I'm available to answer any questions about this proposal.
May I add, Mr. Mayor and Council, I believe the applicant is here as well?
Yes, the applicant's here.
Okay. Before we go to the council, would the applicant like to make any comments right now, or? Okay, come on up.
Hello and good evening. My name is Pam Ritchie, and I'm a planner with RRM Design Group and am representing community health centers for tonight's entitlements. And as a little bit of background information, the project team's been working with city staff for over a year now on the project to create a new state-of-the-art health facility on the project site, and supports the Planning Commission's recommendations for approval of both the general plan amendment and zone change. The new clinic will provide needed health services for local residents, and higher paying jobs will be created for medical professionals. The goal with the project is that these added jobs will benefit the community and provide for a better jobs housing balance in the city of Lompoc. So at the Planning Commission hearing on February 14th, the Commission agreed that the proposed commercial use was appropriate since it's immediately adjacent to other commercial uses on the east side and located also on an arterial street. And during discussion, the Commission noted that the site prior to an approved zoning in 2006 had been zoned planned commercial development, which is the zone category being requested tonight. They also acknowledged that in the 12 years since the property had been rezoned from residential to commercial, that a housing development never transpired and wasn't constructed, so they felt that the commercial use was probably a preferred use for that particular site. And as Brian Halverson mentioned in his staff presentation tonight, the proposed zone change won't negatively affect the city's housing supply as envisioned by the city's RENA. So with that brief introduction, I wanted to turn the presentation over to another member of the project team who's here tonight. His name is Ariston Julian, and he's with Community Health Centers, and he can provide more detail about the clinic's operations and other benefits to the community. And those were my opening comments, unless you had any questions.
Okay, we may have some more later.
Okay, thank you.
And yes.
Mayor, council members, staff, and audience, my name is Ariston Julian. I'm the Facility Director of Community Health Centers of the Central Coast. Just a minute on the history of trying to provide healthcare services here. Back when I started back in '78, we were in the Holloway building. We went across the street to the Mosby building. They went to F Street. And at that point, there weren't very many, there wasn't much in the way of area to provide health centers, which we're trying to build, which are super centers. We're both in Santa Barbara and San Luis County, and our goal in working with the Neenan Design Build Construction Group, we're looking at a minimum of 20,000 square foot buildings. And in order to do that, you're looking at minimum of 2 acres. I think in '08, we actually partnered with Kendall Shepherd folks, and we're up on 425 West Central on the second story. And we were there. We've been there for quite a while, but we've outgrown that. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I just wanted to mention that right now we serve currently about 7,800 individuals here in Lompoc. And patient visits, because one person could come in 2 or 3 times a year. We have 34,580 visits per year for Lompoc residents. With the new build, we expect to add close to another 1,000 individual residents from Lompoc, with another 39,767 visits for Lompoc residents. In Santa Maria, we have 18 different sites, and so a lot of our clients from Lompoc, when we don't have a specialist service here, they're taken to, they go to Santa Maria for our site. So all of the services that we're anticipating here are specifically for Lompoc residents. We'll have, right now, we have current staffing is 44 staff for dental and primary care, pediatrics there at our site on 425 West Central. We're going to be adding an additional 24 staff to this new site, and that's an initial roundup, and that'll be close to 69 individual staff persons. We'll have physicians. We'll have about 3.5 physicians, physicians assistants, nurse practitioners, in the future dental. We were concerned too with the amount of. It's difficult to obtain providers in the healthcare. Our physicians make in the area about $220,000 a year. Our dental they're making about $150,000 a year. So we're bringing in those individuals. We're going to have, in this new site, we're going to have 22 administrative staff, which is receptionists and different folks down on the administrative side. And their beginning salary is $18, in fact, $19 an hour. That's for medical assistants, starting at $19 an hour. And these are mainly full-time staff. But most of our services, we have Medicare. We take all different types of payment. Medicare is 5%. Medi-Cal is about 29%. Medi-Cal managed care, which is CenCal in this area, it's large. It's 46%. CenCal, which is our managed care entity here in Santa Barbara County and also in San Luis County, there's a lack of healthcare providers on a pediatric side. There's a large pediatric population here, so they've asked us to increase our providers in the pediatric side. This new building, and we have architects here and other folks that will answer any questions you have related to the building, but we plan on really expanding those services to those individuals, specifically here in Lompoc. That's all I have, so I'll sit, and if you have questions of me now or in later, I'll be more than willing to
I just have one question, and probably any one of you could answer it. And I think the answer I'm going to get is too large and too expensive, but the old hospital, which became the Champion Center, is that something you had even looked at since that closed down now?
Well, what happens is that when we design a facility, and we've designed, let's see, 1, 2, 3, we're in the process of 3 and 4, they're designed specifically for state licensing requirements, which is OSHPAD, which we go by there, which means that our points of care have a circulation system that it's best for us to go ground up. And then we have OSHPAD requirements again for retrofitting or for creating HVAC systems that have negative pressure because of we have to exhaust our exam rooms to the outside. So there's a lot of specifics, even using different pipes, material for pipes and stuff. So we found it a lot easier, instead of renovating a site, is to actually build a new facility. This particular site will give us that. It's using right at 3 acres. Will give us that 28,000 square foot footprint, which is close to 50 points of care, plus the phase, the southern phase, northern phase, will allow us to increase that, plus actually have availability for commercial space. So it's best for us to go brand new.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, sir. Councilmember Vega.
Your service providing here in Lompoc, is that going to stop the flow over to Santa Maria if you guys had this capacity here in town?
Well, our goal now is to, when especially OB, we do perinatal services here in Lompoc, but then they have to go elsewhere to deliver and obstetrical care. So that would be the plan. We call it women's health, which deals with all the women's health. So we're going to expand that arena to where they're not having to drive to Santa Barbara or to Santa Maria for our services. So what we do is we create a medical home to where you have pharmacy, you have immediate care, which we don't call it urgent care, we call it immediate care, to where we have x-rays, and we'll have a dispensary, a pharmaceutical dispensary, where people don't have to go anywhere to go get their meds. We have our main medical pharmacy is in Nepomos, so a physician can call in a prescription and we'll get it delivered the next day, so the people don't have to go anywhere. They'll pick it up. Again, urgent immediate care will be open on weekends, and we'll extend, like in Santa Maria we have it's 8 to 9 o'clock in the evening, so we'll have that ability to expand that to walk-in clients. So we don't want people to drive to Santa Maria. We'd rather have them, because Santa Maria is also our impact, it's the healthcare needs are. Our community health center, we have about 32 licensed sites. We're going to see, we have 170,000 different individuals, and we're going to see close to 500,000 visits. So the better we provide services at someone's home or near, the best. So that's what our goal is, to have it to the point where the Lompoc residents use our services here.
You know, the facility you're proposing here, is it meant to service Lompoc especially, or is it meant to attract Santa Maria or Nipomo over here as an overflow also? We're kind of concerned with that because of Lompoc's demographics, okay?
I understand that, and that's a good question. That's a good point. We have 18 sites in Santa Maria, and that include pediatrics, primary care, immediate care, dental. So there's no reason for our staff, although we're expanding in Santa Maria also, there's no reason for them to come to Lompoc. Our goal is to service Lompoc residents.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, Councilmember Starbuck, you had a question for, I believe, staff. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Halverson, on page 3 of the staff report, there was, concerning the arena numbers, the housing, it says here there was going to be a loss of 74 units, but the handout had 51. Is this just a mix-up?
No, thank you for clarifying that. What ended up happening is I did a little more research after the staff report. I should have brought this up, so I apologize. Thank you for the reminder. And there was some units that were rezoned off of Laurel, and I think it was O. Started out at 11 parcels, and then I think it went down to about 8. And those units were originally considered as a loss, but it really wasn't a loss because when we went back and looked at the general plan housing element, they didn't even look at those because those were industrial buildings on those sites. So that's why it's only the 51. The Mosaic Walk project was actually approved for 60 units, and those were single-family homes. But when the housing element analyzed that property, it only analyzed it for 51. So we have to look at what they analyzed and not what was approved, even though you might want to think, because I thought at first we should be looking at 60, but it's really a loss of 51. So
okay.
Hopefully that clarifies. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, well, the next question here was, the applicant said 3 acres is what the footprint of this project was going to be. The staff report says that we're going to take 5 acres of medium density residential.
Yeah, so let me, if I could direct you to your packet. One of the pages says the proposed development. Do you see this page?
Right.
So the whole site is actually 5.18 acres.
Okay, so they're talking about 3 acres of development. Now, further on in here, we start talking about parking. And now we're working with the unknown of what the other 2 acres is going to be later. Correct. They can say they're going to do something. We could zone it for something, but it's out in Lala. So
right, that's a good point. I mean, the only thing that we looked at now is just some conceptual square footage for retail, but they would have to come back and submit an application for a development plan, and then that would go to the Planning Commission. So that would be analyzed, the parking, all the requirements, circulation, everything would be looked at through a separate application that would need to go to the Planning Commission. So we would make sure that we met all those development standards. They're not ready to build that at this time, but they did want to include the whole site to rezone this evening.
yeah, the other question is, taking something off of the tax rolls for a nonprofit means that we're going to be doing something with low income here, providing competition with existing dental, medical, everything else. So here we are taking the path again into the low income world. What I'm curious about with this, if this was to pass, what are we going to base the pilot program on if we decide to do that? The figures are not really here to tell what we can do. It just says possibly do, basically.
Yeah, I want to direct that to Brad Wilkie, who looked at some numbers from the League of Cities, and it's just kind of some estimates right now, and so that would be something that would be formulated later. I don't know the exact numbers at this time, but that would be a future discussion if you want to go.
Well, we have the numbers now that we make on property tax. we can assume that if the 51 homes, single-family homes were built, we could have a pretty good guesstimate on what the property tax would be, but we have no idea what the pilot money would be if we went down that path. Plus, we have the enhanced districting with the Mosaic Walk.
Right. I mean, that's correct. I mean, right now, I just don't have, an answer in regards to that. I've never worked on a pilot program. This is something we recently just researched, and so we wanted to first put it on the table, give that as an option for the council, and then the specifics and the details will be looked at later. But I just don't know the exact parameters of that now. And in fact, the item really, if we go that route, should be continued because you'd want to come back and look at that.
Yeah, well, last time we did this was when we did the Cypress Square Apartments, and we built a commercial component that still remains empty. So we've been bit with this before, but more later.
Correct.
Councilman Mosby.
Yeah. When I watched the Planning Commission meeting, I know they were very concerned about the parking requirements. And knowing that we've got a couple, hospital that was built, and we have another complex that has serious parking issues, even though with the requirements that we put on there. And I know you're looking at a potential 10% reduction in that. And if you do the numbers with 69 employees and with a clinic and such, I think you're going to be putting a huge burden on the neighboring community with this. I mean, we hope that this goes through, that you're going to be successful, and I just really think that you shouldn't be doing any reductions at all at parking. You don't want to have something that's not working. You don't want to get something built and you go, yeah, if we build the commercial up there, we can modify. I think you need to take care of this first, and then if you build the commercial up there and you need to modify, you do it on top. But I think you shouldn't be reducing down the parking requirements on this. I mean, I'm a big advocate for parking, and I know when projects get built and you start putting burdens on neighbors, then you have facilities people aren't happy with.
Yeah, really good point. It was discussed pretty extensively at the Planning Commission meeting. So essentially, the Planning Commission did wrestle with the reduction in parking. It was about 16 parking stalls. So what they did is they conditioned the medical clinic project to come back with a development plan within a year. And they wanted to look at that project, essentially the project that would be on the north side that faces ocean. And in a nutshell, they're going to get those extra 16 spaces on the northern half. They did feel comfortable moving forward, approving the development plan, even with the reduction in 16 spaces. They worked very closely with staff. They made some really good points on a reduction in parking. And again, the Planning Commission, we presented it, so it could have gone either way, and the Planning Commission decided to monitor it, so to speak, and see if they come in with the development plan for the northern half and address the parking at that time. So that's the solution the Planning Commission came up with.
This sounds more like one of those things, a strategy of we'll pass it now and then we'll read it later type of thing. I mean, we already see the complexity of this. We already see other models in the town with this. We see that with the hospital. Go look and see how many vehicles park in Home Depot. We saw it with the other clinic further down here off of Barton, and the overflow in the neighboring commercial development where they had to post signs all over the place to stop the overflow. I think it's more prudent to take care of the minimum. If anything, you come back after with the full allotment of parking, you come back and see if in the future that you need to modify. I believe with this many employees and the success that they're anticipating, that you definitely need to have the full allotment of parking.
Come on up, you can address it.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak again. The project team just wanted to let the council know that since the Planning Commission hearing last month, we've reworked the parking around the clinic to add a number of spaces. So we've reduced that deficit appreciably to only, there's 5 additional spaces that would need to be provided on the northern parcel A when it gets developed. The architects have developed a preliminary plan showing 2 commercial buildings on the site, and the parking that is shown for that exceeds the city's requirements by over 8 spaces, and includes that extra 5 spaces that would be needed for the clinic deficit. So that should allay some of your concerns about any kind of parking deficiencies.
Councilmember Mosby.
And that's if the facility to the north gets built, correct?
The CHC will own that site, and they plan to retain ownership and construct a project on it. The architects have already developed plans, and they're looking to submit it within the next year.
Again, if it gets, I mean, things happen. We've gone through this before, but if they don't, what is the guarantee that those spaces would?
Again, we're very close to meeting the requirements, which are quite stringent for, so at the worst case scenario, it would be 5 spaces. But the plan is to submit something within the next year.
Councilmember Starbuck.
Yeah, so basically the project on the north, the general commercial aspect of this, we have no idea when it's going to be built. We have no idea what's going to be built. And what's going to drive the size of what's going to be built is going to be the parking for the clinic, it appears. So the commercial is subordinate to the nonprofit aspect of this. True?
I wouldn't characterize it that way, no. There's a possibility that it could be leased to a commercial entity, one of the buildings. I think the CHC plans to utilize one of the buildings, and I can ask the other members of the team if they'd like to add any more information about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, already we've encumbered that property if this project's approved.
Encumbered it?
Well, yes, with the parking.
There would only be 5 spaces that would need to be added on.
And whatever the commercial entity would require at that point.
Right.
Which
but they
we have
would
no
meet
idea.
all the city's requirements, I think is our point.
So the commercial seems like it's a second thought here on the frontage.
No, I wouldn't characterize it that way, no. It's an important component of the project. I think Ariston Julian also had some comments.
Yes, of course.
Do you want me to leave that plan there?
That's good. Yeah, thank you for the comments, and they are important. One of the things that we also offer within our system is optical. So one of the plans that I've seen that in working with the city staff is that to limit the size of any buildings there to 12,500 square foot within that phase, that northern phase. Included in that is we're still toying with the idea of how big that commercial site would be as opposed to what we need for our medical. We're going forward with our plans. They're going to be submitted. We're working right now in terms of with our design group to say this is what we want. We know that parking is an issue, and we committed to the Planning Commission that we're going to build. They wanted to see a plan in no later than a year. We already have plans submitted that we're working on right now that shows the commercial, shows what we were planning on in terms of, say, optical, but it also includes all the parking that's going to be necessary. So we're not shying away from that, but we know that parking is an issue. Every site that we have just about has a parking issue, and you know that Lompoc has one of the highest parking requirements, and we're meeting that. And again, the new site, and you'll see, I don't think you have it before you, but the new the phase development, including the parking and also the commercial and our expanded medical centers moving forward. We're not waiting for a year. So, and also on the pilot side of things, we're willing to work with the city in terms of what general fund money is hard to come by, and we appreciate that. You know, I'm affiliated with the City of Guadalupe side, and we wish this was being built over there, but it's not. But we're good neighbors, and we don't want to cut any negative relationship with the city. And if there's any negotiation that we need to deal with a pilot program, we're willing to sit down with staff and we all to make sure that this project goes. We don't want to hold this project and these approvals back because of an issue related to the amount of money that is generated through the pilot program. So we're willing to go negotiate with you all. So don't let that hold it back, because we need this to move forward. We're anxious to get going. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else?
Could I clarify one more thing?
Go ahead.
Regarding the parking, what I didn't mention is that if CHC does not come back in a year, the Planning Commission clearly would bring their development plan back. And essentially what you would see is that additional parking, which went from 16 to 5. So I appreciate them bringing that up. They could come back and amend their permit to have those additional spaces. In this case, it's about 5 spaces. So we do have that avenue, as you know, to always come back and amend the permit. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Vega.
Brian, as far as the pilot program's concerned, that money is going to be going toward general fund, just as if it was property taxes, right? Whatever's negotiated, it's not going to be designated toward an impact fee or something and steered somewhere else, as far as we're talking, right?
Councilman Vega, I believe that is true. It would go directly to the general plan. Brad, do you know something? Or
I've heard other projects that have come in and they've tried to negotiate in, and it's toward future impact fees, and it's designated towards something else. So that's why I asked that question.
Yeah, general fund money.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll open this up to the public. You have 3 minutes to speak to us on this item. Seeing no one rise, we're going to close public comment, bring it back to the council. Councilman Mosby.
You know, the biggest problem that I see here, it's not with the project, it's with the location. And it's only because of my calculations that I went around town and started analyzing what we had for vacancies in the commercial component in our town. And that was over 120,000 square foot of vacancies in commercial. And as far as housing, we all know where we are with housing. We know we're desperately short housing. And I hate seeing a project, yes, they haven't built it, I know, but a lot of people haven't built. And the timing isn't right for them. And that's one of the main concerns that I have. I would like to see some of our other properties repurposed. I would hate to see, I don't know what the analysis is, whether you're going to see some other buildings go vacant because they're building this building. We know we have a ton of vacancies, and I don't know if there's opportunities. I know it's nice to build up brand new. I get that. But we have so many vacancies in town in the commercial component. You know, there's a building, I know they've made mention that and I don't know if this is still available, they were renting above the oncology center. And I heard that might have fallen out, but we have, 7,000 to 8,000 square foot over there. There's a 10,000 square foot building across the street. And I'm just wondering, what is the economic impact across the whole layer of the community? And I know we need health care. I know things are moving more of this, and it'd be nice to have a great efficient building, but are we going to see a really nice building here and we're going to vacate more, or are we going to keep some of the other commercial components vacant? And I would like to see a little bit of analysis done on that, because we're asking for a zone change. And without the zone change being asked, I don't think we could, I think it would be a great project to go through. But again, if you're setting up levels of strategies, as the Planning Commission, I think, was trying to do when they changed it from a commercial component to a residential component some 8, 9, 10 years ago, I think there was a reason for that. And I know we came over and did a tax enhancement on it because it was so important, because we needed more property tax just a little over a year ago for street maintenance, for urban forestry, for the whole 9 yards, which I'm glad to hear that there's a potential pilot money coming up, which offsets that factor. But I'm really concerned if we, what is the direction of this town? If one day something's zoned residential and the next day it's zoned commercial, how do we move forward correctly with this? Nothing against the project that they're putting forward. My concern is the zoning aspect, and is there abilities to repurpose? Again, we have, I don't know if anybody totally knows and done the analysis of the vacant commercial property in town. Does anybody know total square footage? How about vacant commercial dirt in town? Do you have that number?
Councilman Mosby, we didn't look at the square footage, but we did look at the vacant land. We looked at both the R2PD, and right now there's vacant R2PD is about 36 acres. And so if we took this away, obviously it would be down to about 31 acres. And then PCD, we're at planned commercial development, about 21 vacant acres. And so we would add to that, and that would be essentially 26 acres. So I don't know the square footages, so we'd have to analyze that. But we certainly could come back and give you some square footages on vacancies if you'd like.
And that's kind of my biggest concern is if we do this, are we going to, I don't know, they're currently in a building they would be vacating, I guess, right?
That's correct.
And I don't know what the square footage is of that, but I mean, what are we doing if we keep doing that? Are we going to be creating more and more vacancies in our town? What is the strategy here? Today we do this, tomorrow we do that. And it seems like we need to focus and grab on things. And I mean, nothing to their project. Unfortunately, I think they're in the quagmire of this town, not really moving forward with a proper strategy of what we're doing. What is the zoning plan? So, I mean, that's my biggest concern.
Councilmember Osborne.
With respect to Councilmember Mosby's concern about where we're going in this town has been very flexible at certain phases and other times inflexible. And I think the biggest concern for us is those phases when we have been inflexible, when you have a business that is growing and is very specialized and needs a very special type of building built. So I have a problem telling the free market that you can't build the building you need at the location you've identified to do it in a neighborhood you've identified needs that service, because we're in fear of another empty building. A lot of those empty buildings are something we have no control over and we can't force a business into because they're not owned locally. CHC is a program that is looking to be here present in our community and have skin in the game and expand. And I'm looking at just 22 of the admin employees at full-time jobs. That's living wage jobs at $19 an hour. And that's over $800,000 in salaries coming into our community, and that's not counting the doctors. So I don't want to see living wage jobs go away because we didn't approve a project that fits into the location they're looking at and is very specific to their needs, and potentially hearing how many clinics they have in Santa Maria that they may not vacate the West Central. They may need to keep the West Central and provide services in that neighborhood. So I think it's wrong of us to punish a group that wants to come in, wants to expand, wants to provide needed services with this idea that they're not following what we think needs to happen because we have empty buildings elsewhere. It's way more expensive, especially in the medical industry, to create a building that's very specific for your needs by retrofitting a building. So I don't think that this project should be hurt by all of the things that we absolutely do need to take a look at. And that's part of economic development, and that's part of planning, and that's part of building to give us the feedback on what's empty, why it's empty, where it's located. Does it need to be rezoned? Does it need to be recruited differently? But to punish this group for this project, it is wrong. We should move forward on this and discuss a pilot program to make sure our general fund isn't impacted as much as it will be with the nonprofit being removed.
Councilmember Mosby.
Nobody's asking to punish this group on anything. What it's asking is to not move blindly forward with something without totally calculating the numbers. You don't know if there's going to be cannibalisms going on with other existing businesses. You don't know if there's another property out there. You don't even know how many total vacancies are out there, how many total square footage out there. So what I'm asking is that some other analysis done so it's moving forward so we can see what we're doing. You don't just go and say, well, willy-nilly, let's just change this because we don't want to punish somebody. I'm not trying to punish these people. I think it's a good project. My concern is we've got a number of housing units. We know where we are right now. We have almost nothing available. There's nothing being constructed right now. You're going to potentially take 50 some odd homes off the open market. So that's 50 families that potentially wouldn't have a house. So it's more than just that. It's about moving forward with a proper strategy and not just changing because the wind's blowing. The concern I have is that you haven't seen the total impacts that are out there and how many commercial properties we have vacant currently right now and what will happen. Do you want to have another thing built and you want another property vacant, another potential blight on the community? And analyzing and see if there is a better place for this to fit. And that's my question on this.
Councilman Vega.
I know this is coming back at council. The pilot program I don't think was explained fully on how this would work. If there was a pilot program, the amounts, would it be multiple years or a one-time pay? I'm not sure if we can get that information. It's an important decision if we move forward with something to know how it's going to come back and see how the loss of property taxes could be substituted in a different way.
Mr. Pannoni.
If I may, through the mayor, the concept of a pilot program is in essence to make a city whole for the loss of the property tax revenue that would have been generated on the site. What you need to decide, first of all, if you want to take that first step of doing a pilot program, and then if you do, let staff know what you'd like to use as the barometer to determine what that pilot program will provide. You could use the current tax that's levied now on the vacant lot and say that's the tax that you want to have the pilot program pay. You could say if it's currently as it's currently residential zoned, how many units can be built and what tax would be generated if that was built? And you could use that as the amount that you want to recover. Or you could say, when it's built, what would the tax have generated if it wasn't a nonprofit who's getting a tax exemption? And that would be the tax that you would use as the amount that you'd want to have CHC pay for tax, for the tax in lieu. And that would be an ongoing payment with some kind of escalator, whether the escalator would be the same as the escalator that's on property tax at 2% a year, or some other escalator that you think makes more sense. So you have all those options to determine what you'd want the pilot program to provide. You give us that direction, we'll negotiate with CHC, and then come back to you, as Mr. Halverson said, we'll come back to you with that agreement, as well as the action to approve the resolution for the general plan amendment and the zone change. That answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Councilman Vega.
You know, I think that would probably be a more prudent direction to come back with information on a pilot program and with council's consent to see what barometer we wanted to use, if it was going to be based on 51 residential units or if it's going to be based on the overall value of the project. I think that would be more prudent instead of doing it later.
So, Mr. Pannoni, the process we go through tonight is I'm assuming we bring back this project once we have the information on the pilot, or is that it?
What I would suggest is, because we have an ordinance and a resolution that needs to be, an ordinance has to be introduced and then adopted, and a resolution that has to be adopted. As you know, a resolution, when it's adopted, is effective immediately. So Mr. Halverson and I actually talked about timing earlier today, and we thought an approach could be, if there was a majority of the council that felt this project was worthwhile to pursue, then to not add to the time unnecessarily, you actually could introduce the ordinance tonight if there's a majority to do that. You introduce the ordinance tonight, you don't take an action on the resolution, you give the staff direction as to what you want to use as the barometer for determining what the pilot should provide. And when we come back to you after a negotiation in 2 weeks or 4 weeks, however long that takes, then you can approve the pilot agreement, you can adopt the ordinance, and you can introduce or adopt the resolution at that time.
Okay. So, Councilor Mosby.
I just think it'd be important, if we're moving forward with this, that we see some of the calculations of what we're doing. And granted, you're pulling 50 some odd houses off the market. And what is the economic impacts to the other commercial components of this town? How many vacancies, how many square footage? I think it's important that we see what the plan is and what we're moving forward with. Nothing with your guys' project is just, if you go around our town and you drive our streets, you've got 60,000 square foot buildings empty. We got 20,000. We got a couple more businesses that are going out. I think there was 32 vacancies on Ocean Avenue right now, and the number were sizable, and that's the deal. None of them totally fit your plan, but I think it's prudent that before you make a decision that we see if there is an economic impact that's going on that you're going to be doing. Are you going to cause more issues, more blight? We know what happens. You drive into town, you see the old Mervyn's building empty. And I'd like to see you guys work a deal out and put it on there. I mean, there's just a lot of our commercial I'd like to see that's already vacant taken care of. And we're desperately short housing. I granted arena numbers. Thank you for doing the math on that. I know that was a concern at the Planning Commission. You know, we see that. We've got to stimulate somebody to get some development. We haven't seen the housing starts right now. I know we had one triplex, but I don't think we have any other, no new housing being built right now. So, I mean, it's just, if we pull another one of those components off, it's difficult. So I'd just like to see some of those numbers before we went further forward. Okay, Mr. Benoni, one more time. If we wanted to move forward tonight with something, motion we made would be to introduce the ordinance. Next.
Provide direction to staff as to what you would want to use in terms of determining how to figure out what amount of in lieu payment you want to receive. Meaning, do you want to recover the taxes that currently are generated, the taxes that could be generated if the residential is built, or the taxes that would be generated if what was proposed was built but was taxable?
Okay.
And then staff would negotiate with the CHC, hopefully reach some agreement, and then we would come back to you at a future meeting for you to review and approve that agreement, to have your second reading for the ordinance and have it adopted, and have the adoption of the resolution.
Okay.
And we could provide a little more of the economic data that Councilman Mosby is offering or is requesting, if that's something the council wants. It would just be some basic information, because unless we wanted to actually hire someone to analyze that, but we could at least look at the vacancies on commercial.
Councilman Mosby.
And we've got some new information that's come forward with parking. I'm glad to see that you guys, did that, because I think nothing worse than building a project and being short parking and being a burden on your neighbors. So I'm glad to hear that. So there's some numbers there, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was said by Mr. Julian that the commercial component would have been reduced to 12,000. I mean, in our form it says 14,000. Was it 12,500 or something? Along with some, there were some other numbers that have tuned up quite a bit in here.
Yeah, the numbers have changed, but staff doesn't have anything on file yet. We met with the applicant. 15.5, okay. But we don't have anything right now. This is all just something that they're designing and they're looking at, but we don't have anything that's been submitted yet. But obviously that project would be reduced and we could get that extra parking on that site.
And with regard to the parking, as Mr. Halverson said, the Planning Commission has created a protection for the city so that if something doesn't show up on that northern property, the Planning Commission will change or has the ability to change the development plan and require those 5 or however many spaces to be put on that northern property now, or not now, but then now.
Yeah, correct. That's correct.
No, again, my deal is moving forward and not seeing the economic impacts to the community.
If I could ask a question regarding that, just so that we're sure we provide the information that Councilmember Mosby wants. We certainly can figure out how many vacancies there are today. I'm not sure that we can find a connection between if this project's built, somehow it's going to add to the vacancies. We could, I guess, find properties that are the correct square footage that would be needed for this property, those that are vacant and those that are not vacant. If they're not vacant, that means someone would have to rehabilitate what's there, which probably financially doesn't make sense because of the need for medical buildings. And if they're vacant properties, it would be unusual for the city to sort of push a private party to buy this property instead of that property.
No, and I understand that. I'm just talking right now. We're looking at a potential zone change, so that's what I'm to make that movement from taking 50 houses, potential houses, off the market. So I mean that's kind of what I'm looking at, and what are we doing? How are we balancing and weighing this out? I don't know. Maybe they could answer a couple of questions. How many square foot they're in the current property they are right now? That, I mean, are they planning on renting that, or is that going to be going vacant as well? And I know it's important to move forward and progress. It's just I think we do something this big, pulling 50 houses off the market, we should have what is the economic analysis that we're doing here.
And I do think the Planning Commission and our planning manager tried to share the impacts to the RENA numbers and the overall general plan and zoning and strategy. It was formerly commercial, became housing. Given what is around the property, it could be appropriate going back to the commercial and office. So trying to do that analysis to give you some input there as far as the strategy for how it fits into our community. And as a tenant of economic development, business expansion is typically seen as a very positive thing. We're glad that they're here in our community and are growing. I understand we need to analyze all aspects of it, and I think staff is trying to present that data to you here.
I think it was mentioned at the Planning Commission meeting that they were going to be renting above the Oncology Center. Is that not happening anymore? Maybe, okay. I mean, anyhow.
Okay.
If you can have
comments.
You've got a. I mean, I understand it's probably a little bit unique and different, but in our situation with the number of commercial vacancies that we're having here, and I guess they've. And I kind of looked in their face about the Mervyn Center. I guess they looked at that. You investigated that, and it was a no-go on that one? Okay. Well, I think that in contemplating and weighing this, I believe your economic impacts are going to be greater than what my concerns are. How many of those jobs, maybe, could you come to the microphone, answer? Of the 69 staff, how many of those are going to be new hires?
There's 26 that are new in it, in addition to that.
26 of the 69, or 26 on top of the 69?
No, 26 to 69. So we're going to be adding an additional 26 for a total of 69.
Okay.
New, and the majority of staff that work now at Lompoc at 420 are from Lompoc, and we met just to point out the Kendall Shepherds. I met with the Shepherds. They're ready to move up. They're ready, that's 9,000 square foot.
Okay.
Which we actually, this building will be built with local, as much as we can with the local contractors. But we put the CHC put about $1.2 million in tenant improvements, and that's staying there. If you've ever been there, you should check it out. But they're thinking of, the Shepherds are thinking of expanding from the bottom stairs to go upwards, so that's going to be taken care of. There was another point. But does that answer your question? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm just, again, I hope you appreciate what I'm looking at. I mean, we're pulling 50 houses off the market. I know they haven't been built.
We've looked at multiple buildings. The Mervyn's building, they don't want to deal with us. So they don't want to deal with that area. We're also looking at certain parts of Lompoc are in a distressed area. So there's new market tax money that we're trying to pull into town. And so those are our goals. We want to be good neighbors. We don't, especially parking, because we know that that's a big issue.
You hit the nail on the head with the parking. You won me 60% over with that one. So
okay, thank you.
I'll relax my concerns on that. I guess I could, with what the city attorney said as far as moving with it, approving the ordinance and moving forward with
the pilot,
with the potential pilot.
We want to be here, so
are you okay with that?
We're okay with that. So.
Okay, is there any, I don't know if there's more.
We've got other council members who would like. Okay, Councilmember Osborne.
So if that was a motion.
Well, I still want to hear from both of you.
So I definitely want to see the ordinance moved forward and propose that the pilot program be reflective as if what's currently being built were being taxed. And that would be my preference.
Okay.
Very difficult decision. Health over general fund money over residential zoning. Me being in real estate, it's really difficult because we see Lompoc has a housing shortage in the future, and the zoning's very difficult to come by here. All we have is infill left, or we have to do some sort of annexation, which has to go through the LAFCO process. So it's very difficult to weigh people's health over general fund money, over a rezoning. I think, Mr. Pannoni, if you wouldn't mind clarifying, okay, by introducing the ordinance tonight and by having another action another night, are we actually accepting and moving forward with this, or it's going to take another action item to actually implement this? Is that correct?
It's going to take 3 additional action items. If you introduce the ordinance tonight, it's going to take 3 additional action items. One item will be approving the pilot agreement. The second action would be having the second reading for the ordinance, and the third action would be approving the resolution for the general plan amendment. You have no obligation, after you introduce an ordinance, you have no obligation to adopt that ordinance.
And out of respect to Councilman Mosby's questions, it's a valid question. Sometimes having a plan is better than not having a plan. Some people's health concerns are difficult. Hey, as we all get older or we're younger, people that you guys are subscribing to people that their inability to pay is sometimes a big factor here. I think what our fear factor is here, based with Lompoc's low-income housing and the demographics that we have here, by building a facility of this nature here, are we trying to bring in more of the same demographic, or are we going to be able to change our direction? I believe Lompoc in its economic development stage would like to offer more opportunity to all of the people that are here, along with health opportunities and health care, so that we can raise the bar so people can afford to make their payments and Lompoc's infrastructure can be paid for, is what the issues are that we have within the city. So that would be my biggest concern. And I don't know that we have an answer to that question. So I'll kind of...
Okay, I'm going to take Councilmember Starbuck.
Thank you so much.
Just a couple of things. I don't know really which way to go on this. I hate coming into this with the unknown amount on this pilot program. I know we're going to have a loss with tax base right there. So I'm really going to be wish-wash about that. Parking, I'm not a big stickler on that. I watched the Hilton flounder for 3 spots. I don't think that a couple of parking spots should be a showstopper for this project, but it is a concern when we're going to base a decision on a future project that shows we have no knowledge of right now other than a possible optometry lab. My concern is you will own all the property. You will have all 5 acres. You're going to put in a commercial component. the commercial component cannot be non-taxable. It's going to have to pay taxes unless it's a CHC-owned optometry shop or something. So I don't know. The component on the commercial concerns me because we have a big empty commercial building that has been here for years because we've done this deal before. The competition with existing doctors, the referrals, you're talking about bringing in numerous doctors, numerous dentists. I mean, you're talking about a huge facility here, 49 exam rooms in this place. It's huge. I think it just blows the comprehensive of what I'm thinking is going on here. One of the staff reports earlier on this project was Lompoc has the highest per capita of Medi-Cal Medicare patients. So all of a sudden, it's like here we become the hospital for, you know, basically the low income. We're 27% now. We're the highest in housing low income, and now we're going to be the one to be able to take care of the most low income. We're staying in a low income mode here with this. I'm just kind of confused and not sure which way to go on this right now.
Councilmember Osborne, you had your finger on your light.
I'd like to make a motion to move forward on the recommendation for the general plan amendment and the zone change, and direct staff to come back with an analysis for the pilot based on if this building stayed on the tax roll as it's being built.
Councilor Mosby.
As much I'd like to see other economic numbers, in hearing that they did try to find other properties that people wouldn't even deal with, and that's kind of a deal that makes me give you a second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Mr. Mayor, just for clarity, just to be sure I'm understanding right, was that to introduce the ordinance and bring back the ordinance for second reading, to bring back the resolution and bring back the agreement when we get to that done?
You got that, City Clerk? Okay. And Councilmember Mosby, that is your second. Okay. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Let's vote. Congratulations, 5-0. Okay, looking to see you come back. Okay, we're going to move on to item number 12, which is discuss possible sending letter to the 4th District County Supervisor to investigate funding reconstruction of McLaughlin Road lower water crossing. There's Mr. Luther. Yeah.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Mike Luthers, Assistant Public Works Director, City Engineer. I'm here to discuss the council request from October 20th to discuss possibly sending a letter to the 4th District Supervisor to have them look into potential funding opportunities to rebuild the McLaughlin low water crossing. So in the staff report, I researched what information we had. The two key informations that are attached to the staff report was the 1994 letter and the 2000 memo from the city engineer, which basically describes the 1994 memo was written by the county shortly after the crossing was rebuilt for the last time, utilizing FEMA funds. And the 2000 memo from the city engineer basically outlines the hurdles to reconstructing the low water crossing, such as steelhead, passage, and potential for washing out the road anytime there's a rain event. So I've also attached a draft letter for you to review and comment on, and that's pretty much all I have. Is kind of turn it over to you guys for discussion.
Any questions for Mr. Luther? Okay, I just have, Mr. Luther, I just have one request. If we choose to send this letter, do you have a copy of the letter there in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Okay, the last sentence in the first paragraph It currently reads, "The crossing provided a vital connection from the city of Lompoc to Mission Hills, Mesa Oaks, La Purisma Mission areas of the county and vice versa." I'd like to change that. In other words, I'd like to say the crossing provided a vital connection from Mission Hills, Mesa Oaks, and La Purisma areas to the city of Lompoc and vice versa. So just change those two. So since this is going to the county supervisor, putting more importance on, he's really servicing his constituents in the county and it's not necessarily just for the city of Lompoc. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, discussion, public comment. Seeing no one rise, we're going to close public comment, bring it back to the council. Councilmember Starbuck.
Something that the county probably wouldn't care too much about, but would also help maybe on the sell of this is our busiest intersection in Lompoc, obviously, is Central and H. The 4th District doesn't care, the county doesn't care. But if we were to include this in here, that it would relieve a lot of our congestion in that area, you know, the help factor it would give us on that, maybe included in this letter also? I don't know
really
if it's
have any-
important or would sell it, you know?
There really isn't any data to support that. I don't have any information because the road
Hasn't been
for at least
opened.
last almost 20 years, it hasn't been open.
Right.
I think Councilman Mosby found an old traffic study from the 70s that showed about 4,000 daily trips on the road. But I mean, currently there's just for the local neighborhood, there's about 2,000 trips.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
I'll move we send the letter
With the changes that I,
with the change and vice
And I'll
versa.
second with those changes.
it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Let's vote. And that passes 5-0. Okay, we are going to take a 10-minute break before we go into the next item. Okay. So what got into Joe tonight? Okay, we're going to continue the council meeting. We're going on to new business. Item number 13, discussion and direction regarding possible commercial cannabis activities tax measure for the November 2018 election. And this will be Ms. Gallivan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. During budget deliberations, taxation of cannabis was brought up by proponents of the cannabis industry as a way to assist the city with its budget challenges if the council were to legalize commercial cannabis in Lompoc. As you're aware, any potential cannabis tax approved by voters would be a new general fund revenue source that can assist the council with priorities such as public safety, parks, youth programs at the library or the aquatic center, supporting outside organizations like the Chamber and other nonprofits that provide valuable services and produce special events that benefit our community. It's important to remember what voters approved. The voters overwhelmingly supported Proposition 64, allowing the legalization of recreational marijuana and local regulation and taxation. Lompoc has welcomed the industry and launched its commercial business application process. 5 different license types: cultivation, manufacturing, testing, distribution, and retail dispensaries. Please consider the merits of the methodologies for taxation on each type of license. And keep in mind that taking this to the voters allows you the option to implement and at what level. It puts a new valuable tool in your toolbox should you want to use it. To achieve your goals in improving our city, the services and the facilities our residents use, these tools can be of assistance to you if you want to use them. We thought it important to share with you the many options that are available and hired SCI Consulting Group, the firm that is assisting us with our commercial cannabis process. We asked them here to help walk us all through the options that are available. SCI Consulting Group is one of the primary consulting firms providing comprehensive cannabis policy services in California. I'd like to introduce John Bliss, the president of SCI Consulting Group, who's going to walk us through some of these different methods.
Thank you, Teresa. Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, staff, members of the public. My name is John Bliss. I'm president of a 25-person firm called SCI Consulting. We're based up in Solano County, and we've been working. We actually work here in the city on your assessment for your pool. We do a lot of local cannabis policy, And I understand you all are considering the pros and cons of taxation of cannabis. So I'm going to walk you through a PowerPoint. It's not too painful, and I'm going to educate you on big picture things like what are kind of the philosophies and differences of a cannabis tax versus other types of taxes. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of wonky detail on some of the methodologies available to you to tax different commercial cannabis activities. I understand there are some people in the community that are supportive of tax, other people are not, so I'll try to give a balanced overview of the pros and cons of taxation for cannabis and let you know what other cities and counties are doing in the state. So let's go ahead and dive in. So the first thing is that when we work A to Z with a city or county, we have 6 big steps that you do for a good implementation, and you've done most of them. And you've hired us more recently to help you with some of the later steps. The first one is to get the information out there and to interact with your community, which you've done. The second one is to put together and approve an ordinance, which you've done. I've had a chance to review it. I liked what I saw. Don't test me on it because I only reviewed it briefly, but it looks good. The third one is to go through the application process and be able to select the optimal and well-suited businesses to work in your city, and you're doing that now. The fourth one we call fees, regulatory fees for full cost recovery. Those have been implemented, as I understand, by the city. That's fantastic. And the fifth one we're looking at here tonight is revenue and whether it makes sense to do a tax ballot possibly this November. The sixth one is the monitoring and compliance of those businesses over time. So you are well on your way to an excellent implementation of this, this new and emerging difficult thing to take a look at. So I'm going to continue. So if you go for a tax, you have the tax is for general fund enhancement. So that's good, and I wanted to kind of stop here and talk about some of the big pictures that you look at when you're looking at cannabis taxation. So of course, you have 2 counterbalancing forces. One force is a city, like all cities and counties here in California, would like to increase general fund revenue. So that is a force that's telling you to tax at a high rate. There's a counterbalancing force that's going on with cannabis, and that is there's competition. And cannabis businesses compete with 2 different main groups. And the higher the tax, the harder it is for those your legal regulated businesses to compete. One of those groups is the black market. And so as you increase taxes on your legal businesses, it impedes their ability to compete with the black market. And I assume the one thing everyone in this room agrees with is that we'd like to suppress the black market. And so by increasing taxes, you're working against that. And so you have to have a balance on that. There's another group that your regulated businesses compete with, and that is regulated businesses in other nearby areas, okay? And so there's somewhat in California, there are cities. This is an exception because you're not right next to a city. One of our clients is the city of Santa Clara, which is right next to San Jose. And there are dispensaries within 5 feet of the border. And so in those situations, unfortunately, we have public agencies that are competing against each other to lower their taxes to appeal to local businesses. In this case, you don't have anyone super close, but you do have close. Realize that cannabis taxation, just to give you a sense, this is a sense of scale, a typical dispensary purchase in California is between $50 and $100. And let's do the $100 because it makes the math close. The local cannabis taxation usually ranges on retail from 3 to 10%. And so let's say we use the 3%. So $3 on a $100 purchase probably would prevent someone from traveling very far to get that to an area that had a lower tax. If they had 2%, they would be traveling to another town for 1%. We don't see that taxation on retail, particularly in a place like this where you don't have a city across the street, is going to be a major factor. However, for manufacturing and cultivation, those businesses, typically they exist in an agency location, and then they may sell their product throughout the entire state. And for those types of businesses, the taxes can be an important factor. So those are a couple things to think about. The last kind of big picture thing to think about that makes taxation on cannabis a little different is it looks and feels different to voters, because most of the voters, the majority of the voters, are not cannabis consumers. Now, you might have 10, 20, 25, 30% of people here, 10 to 20, 30% of the people here may be cannabis consumers. And so that's a minority of the overall voting population. And so the voters and there's lots of reasons to vote yes, there's lots of reasons to vote no, but they are likely, most people are voting on a tax that they will not pay. And that plays into the dynamic of voter thought as you go forward. So those are kind of some of the big forces that are in play with a cannabis tax. And now I want to dive in and give you some of the details of different things we look at when we develop tax methodologies. And then I'll kind of summarize at the end and kind of dovetail the big picture forces that I've just discussed with some of the smaller things so we can talk about that. Okay? So when we look at tax methodology, there's lots of different ways you could measure cannabis. And there were, people have been at this for a while. City of Oakland, City of San Francisco, Los Angeles have been at this for a while. But we have come down to 2 or 3 main ways to measure and tax cannabis. One of them is on gross receipts, and gross receipts is a technically slightly different than a sales tax, but it's essentially taxing something on revenue generated associated with that particular sale of that product. Another one that's very common is square footage. And square footage is got some pros and cons that I'll discuss. And the third one is weight. Ironically, the state of California is taxing cannabis on weight out of the cultivation process, as a cultivation step. Weight brings with it, there's some nice things about it, but it has a high administrative burden. So very few cities and counties are using weight. They're mostly taxing on gross receipts or square footage or a hybrid of the two. So let me continue. Again, this slide, you all know it, but I often talk to groups that don't have Prop 26 compliant regulatory fees in place, and I have to remind everyone a fee that a commercial cannabis business would pay is for full cost recovery, and well-designed fees will pay all the costs of the city has in terms of inspection, reviewing applications. All of those fixed costs ought to be reimbursed by the fee. That's not entirely, fees are imperfect, and there are some limitations by Prop 26, but well-designed fees ought to get you very close to that. So the tax is something different. Tax is for new revenue. Now, so new general fund revenue. Now, as Teresa pointed out, what the city has been considering here is to go out for a general tax, and you could do that in November 2012. That's a 50% threshold, and that brings with it the greatest latitude for the city to spend that revenue. It would essentially benefit your general fund. Alternatively, some agencies are using a special tax, and in California, the difference between a special tax and general tax is pretty easy. It only is, the difference is whether or not you designate how the revenue will be spent. With a special tax, you clearly designate how the revenue will be spent, and it is a 2/3 threshold. A general tax, which most cannabis taxes in other agencies have been general taxes, it's a 50% threshold, so it's a slightly lower threshold, and it gives you greater latitude on how do you spend it. The only caveat with the general tax is that it's limited to when it can be proposed to the voters. Arguably, in most cases, it's in the even year November elections, which you have in November 2018 and November 2020. There are some exceptions to that, but that's generally true. However, as you can see in the brief table below, cannabis taxes are largely well supported in California. In fact, it's a little bit hard to see, but most cannabis taxes, whether they're proposed as general taxes or special taxes, have been passed in California above the 2/3 threshold. So it's an interesting tax. In many cities that frankly can't pass a 2/3 special tax, they're able to pass a 2/3 cannabis tax, largely because the perception of the voter is different in that it's a tax that will bring revenue to a city, but most voters will not be paying that tax. So let me continue, and I'm going to get in a little deeper, and let's talk about cultivation taxes. And this is the most complicated one. We'll start with this, and the other ones are a little easier. So cultivation can be indoor, and in fact, I believe your ordinance limits it to indoor, so I'll keep my comments to indoor. So there's two main ways to look at cultivation tax, and one is gross receipts, and the other is square footage. And you see a lot of pros and cons there. They generally come down to the same basic issue. With cultivation, there is an argument to be made that you do it as a square footage. You go out, you measure once. Now, there's some gamesmanship and some argument whether it's the grow area or the overall area. Do you include the drying and curing area? All of that kind of stuff you can work out. That's all detail. But you come up with a fixed amount of effective square footage for that particular grow, for that particular cultivator, and you associate a dollar amount with it. $3 per year per square foot, $10 per year per square foot, something like that. That's a very good, reliable, administratively very easy way to collect that tax. That revenue is very, very predictable. On the other hand, you could also do it as a gross receipts, because that cultivated material at some point will be sold by the cultivator. Even if it's a micro business or something, there is a supply chain, and it will go and it will be sold at some point, and you could collect it on gross receipts. The nice thing about gross receipts is that the city would benefit from the city would ride up with revenue as that cultivator succeeds, which we hope and predict they will succeed here in Lompoc. And so you get the advantage of an increased revenue. If you have a cultivator that is doing well, then you can share in that revenue with the city. The shortcoming of gross receipts is that in cannabis, crop loss is a real possibility. And so we have a number of clients that are cultivators, and if they lose an entire crop or a portion of a crop, the gross receipts goes way down if you tax only on the gross receipts. The square footage gives you a protection against this. So the most common model right now for local agencies to tax cultivation is what we call a hybrid model. And so there's a fixed amount per square foot that is taxed, and a gross receipts percentage that is taxed, and whichever is the greatest in a given year is how much tax revenue that cultivator owes. So that's typically how we're proposing it and the development that we're looking at with our clients. Let me go on to retail. In most cases, retail these days is done as gross receipts. There are a couple that are doing square footage. I don't know of anyone that's doing weight, but I'm probably wrong. There probably are some. Gross receipts, because that retailer is in the business of paying taxes. The record keeping is good and is shared because they're going to pay on their adult use, they're going to pay what was formerly the Board of Equalization, I think it's CDTA now, they're going to pay those taxes, and so a percentage on retail is quite common. You also are looking at three other, I think you're allowing licenses, correct me if I'm wrong, on there are 5 main commercial cannabis activities. We've talked about cultivation and retail. You also have manufacturing, distribution, and testing. For manufacturing and distribution, we're seeing gross receipts, square footage, or hybrid. Probably hybrid is what we see the most often. And then for testing, if a testing lab does come into business here in Lompoc, that's essentially cannabis testing labs, knock on wood, so far haven't enjoyed the same economic difference or advantage that other cannabis businesses have had. We often don't recommend that a testing lab is taxed at all, or if it is, at a very low rate. So they're very, as I say, for all of these activities, you have some latitude. What we will do in our role on this is we'll take, obviously, we'll hear direction from you all tonight, and we'll develop some models that look at different tax rates and associated revenue, and we'll share with you what other cities and counties are doing. So let me move right along because I want to talk about this, and I apologize, this is a little hard to read. I believe this is one we developed for the city of Merced, but it's a good way to share our particular approach. And our approach is essentially, and it's driven largely by the market forces and those two counterbalancing forces that we talked about earlier. We tend to recommend a responsible maximum rate, and a maximum rate would be probably anywhere between 7 and 15%. But we also, our firm usually recommends a low initial implementation rate. We know that going out to the ballot is expensive and risky, and you only want to do it once. We know the cannabis marketplace is very, very dynamic, and initial tax rates since January 1st have been coming down, not going up. The product cost, in fact, I talked to a grower in Colorado who has a big industrial farm in Colorado. I talked to him last week. In 2015, he was selling cannabis product at about $1,800 a pound. Last week, he sold some for $600 a pound. So in Colorado, we're seeing the price drop by a third. And so tax rates are coming down, and legal regulated businesses are concerned about overtaxation. So our firm is conservative. We don't want you to have to ballot more than once. And so we don't typically recommend that you ballot at a low rate of 1, 2, 3, 4%, but rather put a maximum rate there because we don't know how the marketplace is going to change over time. And so we typically come up with a methodology that has tremendous flexibility and gives the local taxing authority, which would be you guys, the flexible ability to adjust that rate. But in this particular example, we did gross receipts we balloted at a maximum of 10%, but in the actual ballot documents, the city made a commitment that they would initially implement at 3%. That was something that and that was after considerable outreach and discussion with the private sector, and the private sector was comfortable with that. They had a good relationship with the city in that particular case, and they were comfortable that their businesses would pencil out. However, this market is going to change, and it's going to change rapidly in a variety of ways. There will be winners or losers. There will be a shakeout. The cost of product will go down. The green rush and the euphoria and that we've all heard and read about will come down to something more reasonable, and you all need the ability to adjust and optimize your revenue. You want your local legal businesses to succeed, but you also are in the business of taxation and generating revenue, and so you'll want to have a sweet spot in there. In the other columns on this, we show a square footage. In fact, I'm seeing this one. Our square foot rate maximum was 25, which is very high now, 7 initial, and then we had the hybrid model that I mentioned earlier. Here are in your staff report. There were examples of other areas, what was happening. I'm not going to read through these. You can take a look at them and take a look in your staff report. The philosophy that our firm that I've described to you is not unique to us. Other firms are making similar recommendations, and a lot of agencies that are working just with staff, if they have larger areas, they're coming up with similar things. There is a maturity in the cannabis taxation market. It's funny saying that because it's such a new marketplace, but the maturity is lower. Tax it, ballot it at a reasonable rate, implement at a lower rate, and then work with your local industry to make sure that they are financially solvent at those tax rates. Here are some generations. A lot of times we are tasked by a public agency to give them a sense of how much revenue we are getting. There is no crystal ball, there's no exact science there, but there is an art to it. And we've developed a couple of ways to look at it over time, and I want to share this with you because I think it should be part of the calculus in your decision whether to go forward or not. What is the census scale? Again, our firm tends to be conservative. We're conservative. Our modeling tends to be very conservative, and we've looked at up and down the state clients we've worked with and clients that we haven't worked with, and we've developed a rule of thumb. We call it our rule of thumb formula number 1. It doesn't come out across like rocket science, but it's typically you take the population and you multiply it between 10 and 20. We use 10 in an area that has is only allowing a couple of activities or something. In this case, since you have a fuller, broader slate of commercial cannabis activities, we use the number 20. And so when you multiply those together, you get 870,000. That's not to indicate in any way that's a precise number. It could be 700 to 1 million. Anywhere in there is where we would think it's not $10 million worth of revenue that you would get from cannabis taxation in Lompoc. It's not 100,000. It's somewhere in the $500,000 to 1.5 million. It's somewhere in that area is what we would predict. We also took a look at the 3% on some of the different cannabis activities you had, and we got that estimate came up with a little higher. I'm going to go to the next slide. Typically, and now this is all changing, but if we've read some studies done by the state that show the typical cannabis retail location in California is bringing in about $1.8 million a year. To give you a sense of scale, do you guys have the chain Jersey Mike's down here? Have you heard of that? It's like a Subway sandwich. I have a friend who's going to buy one of those in Massachusetts. It's like a Subway sandwich, a fancy Subway sandwich, and they on average bring in about $1 million a year. So a Subway sandwich brings in about $1 million of revenue. A cannabis at this point is looking at about double that. If you put a 3% gross on that, that would be $54,000. And if you have in a city by Lompoc, again, this is all just back of the envelope, but give you a sense of the typical rule of thumb for retail locations is 1 per every 15,000. So you might have 3 or 4 here, and so that might of that revenue, you might have $200,000, $300,000 worth of retail revenue here in Lompoc. And then the lower part on cultivation, if you had a 10,000 square foot facility, it would bring in about $1.6 million in gross revenue. And if you hit that at 3%, that would be about $50,000 a year. Just to give you kind of a sense of revenue in each types of business. Briefly, I know there was some interest in the use of development agreements. I'm not going to go into it other than say there are some cities that are using developer agreements in lieu of a tax. City of Sacramento is doing it. Our sense and what we've been advised, and I'm sure Joe can give more detail on that or feel free to overrule me, is with developer agreements, there are limitations on the type of revenue that you can generate. Developer agreements are not designed to supplant or replace a tax, and so there's some issues in terms of that. The one nice thing about developer agreements, why we see them, is cities and counties that are waiting for a November 2008 or November 2020, they have a time between when they're allowing their businesses to start and when they can get the tax in place, have used developer agreements in between to try to generate some revenue on that. So, and we can talk a little bit more on that. Is that right? Final thoughts. Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of go over, and then I'm happy to talk about any questions and stuff. So the cities, you all are on the right track. You've got regulatory fees in place for the full recovery of reviewing your applications, your annual costs, all of that kind of good stuff. You've got a good ordinance in place that regulates health and safety and land use issues here in the city. You are considering tonight and going forward whether you should propose a ballot measure to the voters. And there are a couple of things we would encourage you to consider. First of all, to spend some time with this optimal tax methodology. I kind of went over it very briefly, but we are planning to be working with the city to develop an optimal methodology that looks at a variety of things and looks at what are your revenue goals, what are your goals with your local industry, what's the easiest for you to administer, all of those things. The ability to, the flexibility of that mechanism is extremely important. And so make sure that you have a process in place that allows you to adjust that local taxation as the market forces push you. The next one is, again, we say, come up with a reasonable maximum rate, but implement at a lower rate to suppress the local black market, and then, of course, communicate effectively with your voters. And so with that, I will stop my comments. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, questions, Mr. Starbuck.
In the staff report here, it already lists the taxes that the state is going to take out. I'm curious about what the trickle down would be on this. I've heard that there's going to be grants for public safety. There's going to be grants for enforcement. There's going to be all kinds of other money that will be available. Do you know anything about these?
I would just say, and I will be as politically correct as possible, I'm always skeptical on state grants. So I do a lot of work with different state agencies that have within the enabling legislation talk about grants. There are grants that will be available for agencies that participate, but I would, again, our firm is conservative. We would counsel that you make decisions independent on relying on those grants, because we don't know when they will come and how significant they will come. You did mention the state is actually, and just if you don't mind, I'll kind of talk about the superset, the greater set of taxation, because the state is taxing on, there's really up to 5 steps in the supply chain, which is the product is cultivated, then by state law it's required to go through a distributor. And when we use the word distributor with cannabis, I want to be clear, it doesn't mean retailer. Oftentimes on the news they'll talk about someone distributing drugs, and that use of the word distributor is very different than what it means in cannabis law. In California cannabis law, there's a required step through a distributor. The distributor has some requirements. They're in charge of transportation, storage, collecting taxes, and testing. And so a supply chain might go cultivator through a distributor, then to a manufacturer, through a distributor again, to the cultivator. And the distributor has a branch off to the testing. So the state will tax on the cultivation per weight. They are now implementing a 15% excise tax at the retail, at the very end, the last step. There is a bill in Congress in Sacramento right now to reduce that from 15 down to 11 because of concerns about being able, the legalized businesses to be able to compete well against the black market. So you have also the state is charging regulatory fees. So the state is charging regulatory fees and the taxes on those 2 states. At the retail location, if it's medicinal, they are not due to pay the sales tax. If it's recreational, the sales tax is due. And then most cities, in fact, all the ones we're working with and we're aware of, are also applying a local tax. We recommend that you ballot a tax on each of the 5 steps, or at least 4 of them, if not testing. But if you can think about it, that if you taxed each step at 3%, that adds up pretty quickly. So, however, we want to be sensitive to that. However, we also want to make sure that you don't know there may be a large amount of cultivators here in Lompoc or manufacturers. You need to have or we would recommend, I apologize, we would recommend you consider getting a tax and state in place for all 5 of the activities, because you don't know which of those activities will flourish here in Lompoc, and you can always reduce a tax, but once you've balloted balloted, you can't increase it without an additional balloting. So we would do that. So the state is planning to tax, but and to round up in a long-winded answer, we would counsel conservative view in the benefits from the grants, because we don't know if and when and how much they will generate.
Councilmember Mosby.
You said you wouldn't recommend taxing labs. Can you go into that a little bit?
That we would not. The reason we don't typically recommend taxing labs is because, one, they are arguably the least intrusive business. They look and feel like any other non-cannabis business. They're, at this point, this may change, but at this point, their margins aren't any bigger than any other type business. And so they don't seem to be, they don't benefit from some of the same market forces as cannabis. And so we usually tax them very low or not at all.
And Mr. Mosby, just for clarity, it wouldn't be an additional tax. They would still pay their business license tax, tax certificate tax, but not a special tax.
Right, want to be going on the ballot.
That's right.
No,
I
got
didn't
you.
mention the business.
Just
yeah.
According to his chart up here.
Yeah.
You consider it to be least intrusive. So what is kind of the most intrusive?
Great question. The most intrusive is retail, because retail, and within retail, there's two flavors that are emerging. One of them is the traditional retail that we call a dispensary, that has a storefront that is open during certain hours and people can come in and out. Those are the types of activities that are, frankly, the ones that the public is most interested in and concerned about. It has the biggest issues of traffic and the biggest issues of people coming in and out. There is another model that's becoming very, very popular that we call a non-storefront delivery, and that is, it's a brick and mortar retail, but it's not open to the public. They only do deliveries, and those are less intrusive. So retail, a storefront that you can go into, is typically is the most intrusive. Second to that would be cultivation, and cultivation is only intrusive if their odor control system fails, which it doesn't happen very often. But there's also, and again, it's not most cannabis cultivation, indoor cannabis cultivation, is not particularly intrusive. But it can be, because the issues would be there's a high value product inside, so there's security issues. There could be an odor issue, but that really has not emerged except for in very rare situations, and that type of thing. Manufacturing often looks just like a typical manufacturing place. It's not particularly intrusive, and distribution even less so.
Intrusive, you mean because you're getting customers?
Yeah, I think all of the word intrusive, I think I'm using in this case because it is the type of business that would give you, as a city council member, the least likely that you'd get a phone call from a constituent on a Sunday evening. And that's because with storefront people coming in and out, there is that kind of traffic and all the issues associated with it. And I would be remiss to indicate that a cannabis retail location is necessarily intrusive. In fact, many places in the state, and we have clients, one of them is up in little old Shasta Lake, California, up in Redding, and they've had it's a small town, and they've had 3 retail locations for years, and they are no more intrusive than the shoe store next to them. But at least at first, because of some long-standing attitudes towards commercial cannabis and cannabis in general, retail seems to still be the most likely to cause interest and input from the public.
Have you had an opportunity to cruise our town and to see
I was here on the swimming pool assessment about 7 or 8 years ago, and I cruised it at that time. When I came in this evening, I did not get to drive around. I'm a little bit familiar with it. I've done a lot of work in Santa Barbara.
We have a lot of vacancies in town.
Absolutely.
A lot of vacancies.
Absolutely. And I live in Oakland, and we have a lot of the similar kind of challenges that you have here in Lompoc.
Okay. When you did your computation at your $20 per person, what is the basis for the 20? Is there, a per capita income basis? I mean, more places are more affluent, college towns. I mean, is there?
And I'll begin by apologizing. That model doesn't even have that level of sophistication. The model is derived from looking at all the cities in the state, and we did this about 6 months ago. We updated. We looked at all the cities in the state that we could get their annual tax revenue from, and it's sometimes hard to extract that. But when we could get those numbers, we simply divided it by the population, and we got somewhere between 10 and 20. In your case, usually we go with 20 if it's an area that is a little isolated, if it's a tourist town. So Palm Springs, California was one of the first ones that allowed cannabis, and they're in closer to the $20. Some of the more conservative areas, Shasta Lake is above the $20. They are feeding a lot of the city of Redding, which it's not allowed. And so we just slid that scale closer to 20 for you all, but the underlying model is 10 to 20. We just thought, since you're a little bit isolated, you are allowing all activities, it's probably closer to the 20.
Okay, we do have 15,000 people outside, so that might help.
Exactly.
That might help.
That's
boost
right.
it
And so
up.
the isolated, and I'm counting those county people. You mean those are people that are outside of the city limits, but nearby in unincorporated Santa Barbara County. Yeah, exactly. That also would push it towards the 20.
Okay. Does it affect it, the fact that we're allowing plants for outdoor grow? I mean, does that take numbers down?
Is that
personal use?
For personal use. Again, we assume that every place in our model, since all Californians are allowed to do 6 plants per household, at least inside, we didn't actually factor that into our model, whether they allow that or not.
If we wanted to put a tax on laboratories, if we put it forward to the ballot measure, we could put it at a certain amount, but we could recommend initially 0.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We just.
And in fact, that's what one of our most recent client did exactly that. They did tax the testing, but their initial implementation was at 0.
Okay. Let's open this up to the public.
I just want to say that John did a beautiful job of explaining that. Thank you very much. And let me get my notes here. So I've been looking into some of the technicalities of the way that we are zoning cannabis. And one of the issues that has come up is in not defining a youth center, how do you tell a business to operate? So what I mean by that specifically is in actively not defining what a youth center is, you're creating an issue where it is an interpretation of the law. Now, I understand that in Prop 64, they kept it very broad, but I personally feel that they kept it broad for cities and counties to do what they will and how they view it. So something I would like to see done so that way we can all follow said laws is to actually have an active definition of what a youth center is or isn't using statistical data. And if there isn't, there's a very high likelihood of lawsuit to any businesses that have already bought properties that are currently not inside of an exclusion zone, but could have a future exclusion zone pop up. I think we need to very we need to define what exactly a youth center is, and in defining it, whether we decide to not zone or zone with the youth centers, I think a big problem with zoning youth centers is we're basically creating more red tape to kind of get behind. And it can be argued as similar to gerrymandering. I'm not going to go to necessarily that big of an extreme, but something that we can do to kind of combat that is to at least lower the buffering zone to maybe 200 and 600 feet. And on top of that, to open industrial for zoning, because that would create a larger market for businesses to operate. In addition, I do think that it would be very smart to tax at a very, very low rate to the, you called it the retail, correct? Yeah. Yes, okay. I do think that it would be very smart to tax at a retail rate for the customers and for the consumers who do buy cannabis, because I do think that is a very interesting statistic that a very small minority of the voter population are voting, who actually use cannabis, are voting on this matter, which kind of leads to effect, well, if we leave a very large majority of people who aren't involved in buying this product declare whether, I'm sorry, I didn't have enough time. My bad.
Okay, thank you. Next, please.
Hey there. Good evening, Mayor Lingle and fellow council members. My name is John DeFriel. I'm a local farmer in the Lompoc Valley. And we employ about 65 people in the cannabis industry. We are currently employ about 25 of those people are residents of the city of Lompoc, and we look forward to the opportunity of adding many more jobs here to Lompoc. We anticipate by bringing distribution and manufacturing here, we'll create another 65 jobs, which average between $17 and $22 an hour. Currently, we're sending about 12 of our employees to the city of Hollister to manage a manufacturing facility up there. But as soon as we can get licensure here, we plan on bringing all of them back down to here. The remainder of those people work in our sales, marketing, and cultivation facilities. As was mentioned, the state is currently considering lowering their own tax rate, because with all the taxes compounded right now, by the time it gets to the final consumer, it's about a 45% tax rate. So you need to be very cautious in how quickly that can compound. Additionally, we have seen, similarly to what your consultant mentioned, the price has dropped by about a third in the last year. We used to see $1,800 a pound. We're down to $600 a pound here, and many people are seeing between $300 and $400 a pound based upon their quality. Another thing to consider in any of the licenses in the supply chain, these are wholesale accounts competing statewide. So you're not really competing, we're not competing against the local municipalities so much, you're competing against every single municipality and the tax rates they've set. So unfortunately for us as farmers, it's a race to the bottom. For local municipalities in the tax rates, it's also a race to the bottom. I've always been a proponent of taxing this at the retail level, if anywhere, because people are used to paying retail taxes. There are very few industries where wholesalers are taxed because of this problem of compounding in the supply chain and also creating a lack of competitiveness for businesses. So I think if you do look at a sales tax at the retail level, that would be a sensible position. Again, we're looking to bring manufacturing and distribution here, and we're also going to be leasing space to a testing lab. An additional reason why you wouldn't tax testing is the mandate from the state level with the regulations is this is a quality control and a public health concern. If you tax testing, it'd be like taxing hospitals. The whole point of this is to make sure that the quality of the product is safe for people to consume, and you wouldn't want to discourage the ability to monitor the quality of the product produced here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, please.
Hi, Todd Mitchell. I'm a resident of Grover Beach. So earlier this evening, you had your concerns with nonprofit organization and talking about possibly fulfilling some taxes that would already come in. Well, those taxes will come in from cannabis at especially the retail level here locally already. Grover Beach is already talking about, and on their next month agenda will be considering a reduction in taxes. They've had, I'd say, less than 25% of the applications that they thought they would have originally, and I think many of those are due to taxes. I operate in Santa Cruz County, 7% taxes there, and they're considering reducing those there as well. And I think that Lompoc has the opportunity to increase jobs to a higher wage, and we're talking many hundreds of jobs, and I would go for those. If you are going to do a tax, I would not go with a sky's the limit number, but rather look at something in the 2 to 3% range in the areas where you would like to propose a tax, and to have a cumulative cap, so that if people are operating more vertically integrated or seed to sale businesses within your municipality, that they have a max cap, that it's not, pay on and on and on. So, that's it.
Thank you. Next, please.
Mayor Lingle and members of the council, my name is Jared Ficker. I'm with the firm California Strategies. We work and represent commercial cannabis operators throughout the state of California. We've worked on ordinances and tax measures throughout the state, most recently in Santa Barbara County and the city of Santa Barbara. So we're quite familiar with what's happening in this vicinity in terms of cannabis ordinances and tax rates. We have a number of clients that are highly interested in locating some of their operations, particularly in the middle of the supply chain in the city of Lompoc, and that's for a variety of reasons. The path you took in your ordinance offered a ministerial permitting pathway. It's time efficient, and I think very attractive to folks operating not only in just this region, but up and down the state. We've seen incidences where our clients are chasing essentially permitting pathways and tax rates throughout the state, and I'll give you an example of a few that weren't listed previously in places like the city of Santa Rosa, where tax rates on distribution and testing were at 0 for manufacturing. I think it's 1%. In cities like King City, a similar size and community as the city of Lompoc, their tax measure did something a little different than gross receipts or square footage. They focused on a $30,000 a year annual fee for all licensees. That was approved as a tax, so it wouldn't be the fee for cost reimbursement. So that's another attractive mechanism. I think what I have to say most is that certainty is crucial. People are trying to make business decisions. They're comparing opportunities. As you probably saw in Santa Barbara, tax rates were significantly lower than we're seeing elsewhere in the state, and they didn't have a top end that they could be raised as well. So that gets back to that certainty factor. For here, I think this would be a jurisdiction that it does make sense to do some tax level on retail and even on cultivation. But this middle part of the supply chain, I would encourage you to consider areas at 0 or a fixed fee. That will make this an attractive location in comparison to others. I'm certain clients of ours would look and seriously consider locating here, but if the tax rates are in those higher grocery or even 1-2% gross receipts rates, people will likely stay in a neighboring jurisdiction with rates that are just slightly higher, both out of convenience and attractiveness to their pre-existing operations there. So finally, I'll echo what was said before, significant job opportunities. Most folks operating in the cannabis space pay living wage salaries for folks, or wages for folks, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, please. Okay, seeing no one rise, we're going to close public comment on this. Bring it back to the council. Councilmember Mosby.
Ms. Galvin, can you tell us how many permits have been applied for so far?
We have received 2 to date.
2. Not quite the epicenter for cannabis as I guess we were called in the county earlier today at the county supervisor meeting. I know we anticipate more. We hope there are more.
And maybe I should clarify, within those 2 applications, how many licenses were there? Were they just 1 license or were they several? I think some of them were more than 1 license type, is I guess my point.
Okay. I mean, I've had an opportunity to discuss this cannabis business with quite a few the people have called in and such, and one of the reasons even people heard of Lompoc was because originally majority of us said we weren't going to tax it, and some people found that's I think the Santa Barbara Independent actually identified that, and some people from around actually found out what Lompoc was and came here because we said that. It's not a movement from somebody from Santa Barbara. It's very unique from somebody from Santa Barbara to kind of a Lompoc to open up. I mean, there is an advantage. We see the wine ghetto. They come here because it's a relatively simple permitting process. We don't have a special tax on wine. The county, it can be 5 years and $500,000 to get a winery opened up in the county. The county today, watching the supervisors, there's going to be quite a few acres of product grown. They're looking well over 120 acres, they were saying, and I don't know, maybe 150, 200 businesses over there. And they're going to only have 8 dispensaries in the county. Mobile's still kind of up in the air. But it gives us an opportunity to capitalize much as we did the wine industry with the manufacturing component. And I believe the number of jobs that are going to come here are really going to significantly improve what one of our biggest issues are, is we don't have a lot of jobs in this town available. We're going to fill up a lot of vacant buildings. And I think right now it's premature to mention the word tax. In fact, a lot of economists can tell you, if you want to kill a business, start saying the word tax. And watch what happens, and watch how people don't have to come to Lompoc. And we've heard some speculation of numbers. And I'm glad that you had something to put together there, but we don't even know how much money is going to be there. And I think it's very premature to try to go do a tax assessment before you even know if the business is going to come here. And what numbers are we looking at? How much money are we going to get? But we want to get a tax, and this is a government movement. Let's tax it before we even know if anybody is going to open up here and come here. But I think the advantages would far outweigh it. I don't know how many of you guys watch the TV and you see in New York, they're offering tax-free zones to entice business to the state of New York. And I think one advantage we have over some of our surrounding areas is that we did potentially offer that. I know I was very vocal with that, saying that I felt that we needed a tax-free zone for this. I know the general fund's an issue. I understand that. I understand, too, that we have a lot of people out there wanting jobs. We have a lot of vacant buildings out there, a lot of vacant buildings. And I really think that we need to do what we can to entice into this community. And maybe down the road, maybe if it sees this epicenter that some people are professing, but 2 applications. When did you guys first start taking them?
It's been about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and of those 2 applications, there are several licenses within each of those, and several other businesses have come in to meet with us or ask questions about planning and zoning. So we do anticipate there will be more. And Lompoc has positioned itself well in that we are offering a variety of different business licenses that other jurisdictions, neighboring jurisdictions, are not. So we are competitively poised in that regard.
And hopefully we reap some job opportunities, and hopefully we fill some vacant buildings. We've seen a lot of jockeying of positions coming around And I just believe that, I mean, what we see is intrusive. I'd like to see some of that in some of these vacant buildings out there. I'd like to see a few people coming in and spending some money.
Councilmember Osborne.
So we can't talk about the loss of general fund revenue either from 51 homes that aren't built or a business going from being a profit to a nonprofit status and ignore the opportunity that the state has ensured as part of Prop 64 that there was a local tax available for us to institute. And I am not looking to strip the industry of its profits. And this will not solve our budget issues, but this is a new revenue stream, and this was the reason I supported regulating it local. So again, for us to claim to be fiduciarily responsible and want to solve some of our current issues with public safety and paying our employees well enough so they want to stay and work and protect our community and improve our parks, this is income that I can't leave on the table. I don't want to overtax. I don't want to go above and beyond what the county or the city of Santa Barbara is doing, but it is irresponsible of us to think that zero tax is incentive. You heard from the industry. They realize and expect to be taxed. They also want it to be reasonable, and they want it to be certain. So us saying there's going to be no tax and having a council change and suddenly putting a tax on them and them having to reconsider leaving isn't a good idea. So putting together a tax measure right now, putting it on the ballot, making sure the public who might not have been real thrilled with our decision to regulate has the opportunity to vote on a tax and bring additional revenue in is a key part of going through this process. So again, I get that it's an incentive, but it's far more of an incentive to the industry to know exactly what's going to hit their budget, how it's going to hit, and maybe close that loop on whether or not they're going to put an application in. They may be waiting to hear whether or not there is a reasonable tax or an overreaching tax, whether it's better than the county or city of Santa Barbara, or better than Oakland, or better than Hollister. So again, industry has said we're ready to be taxed. We're planning for it. We just don't know what it is, so it's hard to firm up our plans. So I think it's irresponsible of us to ignore the opportunity the state has provided with Prop 64 and that the voters who voted for Prop 64 expected to be taxed both at the state level and the local because that's the way it was described. So we need to put a tax measure together, we need to put it forward for a vote, and need to provide certainty to those that do want to come to our community.
You know what, I completely, it's no surprise, I was against the ordinance, but every time someone from the industry came, they kept talking about, you know, you're hurting for money, you've got a general fund deficit, why not allow this business to come to town? It will help you. And now we've passed the ordinance, we're allowing it to come to this community. And now some of us are saying, but we're not going to tax it, even though the industry says, go ahead and tax it. I agree that we should not be the highest. We don't want to discourage businesses now that we have the ordinance. But a reasonable tax, and that's why the presenter, Tom, said he could come back with an optimal tax for us, something that would work for us. You know, we've got our surrounding areas, when I'm looking, County of Santa Barbara, City of Santa Barbara. It's laid out there real clear to us. 6% retail, 4% cultivation, 3% manufacturers, 1% nurseries, 8% micro businesses. If the people around us are doing that, why not come up with something? And we could be a little bit lower than that, but I mean, we can't just say no taxes. I don't think in my opinion, we can't say no taxes. Councilmember Mosby.
Yeah, I've always said free market, no taxes. I think we would see far better economic benefit if we filled up vacant buildings. We brought jobs to the community, 200 to 300 jobs to this community would do more than $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 in tax revenue. I think providing an incentive Just went online here, read up Startup New York program. Startup New York helps new expanding businesses through tax-based incentive and innovative academic partners. Startup New York offers new and expanding businesses the opportunity to operate tax-free for 10 years. And if you want to give businesses this town, let's be unique and different. We're not like Santa Barbara that has places that are full. We're not like some of the other surrounding communities, Buellton, that are full. We have a lot of vacancies. We have a lot of unemployment. At this time, we don't even know how much money we would be putting on the table. We would be passing something speculating that it might be $10 to $20. It might be zero. I'd rather see businesses open up, come in, and if you saw that they were this intrusiveness that we had was an issue, we are saying we're doing cost of service, full cost of service. Full agreement with that. If we see that there are significant issues that we need to go out and approach and do, then we can move forward with that. But I think it would be cart before the horse here. Let's get the businesses here. Let's get established, and then see if there's an opportunity. But I really don't believe. I believe the economic benefit will be far outweighed by filling up vacant buildings and bringing jobs to this town that we desperately need.
Councilmember Osborne.
I agree that we need to fill empty buildings. Cannabis is not going to fill every empty building that we have. And to have some sort of economic development program where we can incentivize other industries to come into other locations that are zoned out, they're empty, but in the blue zone, and therefore cannabis can't fill, we need to be able to develop some revenue that we can set aside to incentivize other businesses. And if we don't take advantage of a potential tax revenue that the state has allowed us to do that, we can't even think outside the box and put a potential economic driver in place that says we have this pool of money that we have pulled in from cannabis taxes, and X amount went into public safety, X amount went into parks, and we pulled aside this last 20% to set aside for economic development incentives. We're not taking advantage of a new revenue source. This council decided not to discuss increasing sales tax, decided not to increase hotel taxes, and definitely not to do a utility tax. But we have an opportunity to generate new revenue to put into our community. The cannabis industry has said they want to contribute, but in our application process, we removed the community benefits program. We removed the higher local incentive. So we have done nothing to guarantee our community is being supported in a healthy way if we assume that having no taxes means they're going to come fill every building, and yet when you look at the zoning map, there's quite a few blue areas. So there isn't a lot of empty buildings left in those unblue areas for it to rush in and fill what we know is empty. So what I'd like to propose is listening to our consultant, listening to the surrounding communities, listening to what the industry has given feedback on. I'd like to propose a tax that has a maximum of 8% so that we have that range and don't have to take it back to the ballot. But implementation began at 6% retail, manufacturing and cultivation at 2%, nursery and distribution at 1%, 0% on testing, and a micro-business max of 6%. It is the same retail as the county and the city of Santa Barbara are taking to the ballot. It is lower on their manufacturing and cultivation, and it matches their nursery and distribution and their testing. And then it's a lower micro-business than what the city and the county are doing. By putting a max of 8% on that statement and implementing lower, we at least maintain that opportunity that if we need to lower it, that's there. But if there's an impact on our community and there are detriments and we're not covering the cost of providing public safety and the detriments that the community believes are happening, and we're not recovering funds through the other methods that we have in place, council has the ability to raise the tax if needed. So again, the statement would be proposed on gross receipt tax, maximum of 8%, implement retail at 6%, manufacturing and cultivation at 2%, nurseries and distributions at 1%, 0% at tax testing, and microbusiness cap at 6%.
I'll second that. Discussion, Councilmember Mosby.
I'll propose a substitute motion that at this time we don't move forward with any tax measure on cannabis.
Do I have a second on that? Okay, that fails without a second.
I want to make a comment because I am going to second that, but one of the speakers in the public had talked about already a compounded tax of over 40%. We will receive sales tax. We're already at 1%. You know, this isn't a get-rich scheme here. I really do believe that there will be some economic boost in the city. It'll probably be invisible. It's going to be an invisible industry here. I don't want to tax them away, nor do I want to put us on a balanced scale of Santa Barbara or the county. So I probably will vote along the lines of no tax at this time.
So probably, so you are seconding Councilmember Mosby's?
Yes.
Okay. I think Councilmember Mosby had his light on. Discussion. We're on discussion right now. Okay, Councilmember Osborne.
My argument against the sales tax that the state is pulling in, our report shows right here, 6% of that's going to the state. Only 1% goes local, and only 0.5% of that goes to public safety, and 1/4 goes to county. So we're going to see no more than we see with any other thing locally, and not going to actually generate the kind of revenue that the state has allowed us through Prop 64 to add a local tax. So I completely disagree with the idea that creating the Wild West and attracting any and every cannabis industry to our community without generating additional revenue to deal with the fallout in public safety particularly is a very bad idea.
Councilmember Mosby.
We're not wild, wild west. Prop 64 is very restrictive. Our maps are very restrictive. We have a level of isolation, and we need to have a level of attraction. I believe the 200 to 300 jobs that we potentially are going to bring out here far outweigh a tax measure that comes forward. Future councils will still have the opportunity. They would have something at least to judge on. Right now, you're playing darts with a tennis ball. You have no idea what number you're hitting. And I think it's ridiculous to go this premature about anything, and I believe that it's not the wild, wild west. And we need all the incentives we can. We've got 2 permits in 2 weeks.
Any other discussion? Okay, so we have an alternate motion on the table right now with a second. If we approve...
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
We need to do that technical thing. We had a main motion. Now we have a substitute motion. You first have to have a vote on whether or not you want to replace the main motion with the substitute motion.
Okay, that's not an automatic.
That's not automatic.
Okay.
Unless the main motion maker and the second withdraw their motion.
Okay, so right now we need to vote on whether we are going to accept the substitute motion. So please vote. Okay, so we are going to vote now on the substitute motion.
The substitute motion is now the main motion. So the motion before you is to not do anything with the tax presently.
Okay. We've already had our discussion. Okay, are we all ready to vote? This is on Councilmember Mosby's motion. Let's vote. Okay, and that passes 3-2. Okay. Isn't this going to be fun? Okay. Written communications.
Nothing more than you've already received.
Okay, oral communication. This is your opportunity to speak to us for up to 2 minutes on any item that can come before this council. Seeing no one rise, we're going to close oral communication. Council requests, comments, and meeting reports. Councilmember Mosby.
Yeah, I would like to make a council request to bring back item number 6 from the March 6, 2018 meeting, and that was the discussion of whether dance studios are to be considered youth centers.
Okay. I'll need a second and a third.
I'll second.
I'll third.
Okay. Councilmember Mosby, anything else? Councilmember Starbuck.
I have a council request also, no reports, but a couple of meetings back, Planning Commissioner Gonzalez presented us a sheaf of papers here that were concerning opportunity funds and zones. I went and I talked to Ms. Gallivan about this, and we've already applied and put in for this. What I really would like to request is that we receive a brief staff presentation on what this is and what we have done and what we intend to do.
I'm sorry, there was a question about opportunity zones?
What I was doing, Ms. Galvan, was just asking because when you and I discussed that you had already put in, there was a deadline, the staff met the deadline, but I think it's such a worthwhile program that it would be worth a little time to do a little presentation about what it is we are doing and, you know, let the rest of the council know and what the benefits of this are for us in the city.
So it is a state designated zone, and right now what we were, our deadline for March 15th was to comment on what the recommendations for the state were, and we did, we qualify by our socioeconomic income levels. Low income levels qualify by census tracts. Other qualifying factors also included census tracts that had a lot of businesses. So we had several census tracts that qualified, and as long as nothing changes in the final steps of the process, they will be recommended and eligible per the state's direction.
And what my council request is what happens down the road. What is the benefit to the city and what we are doing with it?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I don't want to get into it now because it could be kind of a little bit in depth, and I think maybe the other council would like to do a little review on it, but I think it's something that's worth discussion later on, you know, if the council wanted to hear it.
Do we have a second and a third on that?
I'll second.
I'll third.
Okay. Councilmember Vega.
Nothing to report.
Councilmember Osborne.
I attended the Joint Chamber of Commerce Vandenberg Air Force Base luncheon, the Parks and Rec Committee meeting, the opening ceremony of the Lompoc Little League, participated in the Leadership Lompoc Valley Government Day panel discussion, and attended as Mayor Pro Tem of the Chiefs recognition dinner out at Vandenberg Air Force Base. I also attended in general a presentation by the Santa Barbara Foundation and the Santa Barbara Conservation Program of the new blueprint that was produced by the organizations. I recommend anyone and everyone, especially developers and those looking to do growth in our community, to go look at the website. It's sbcblueprint.net. It is available to anyone and everyone in the community. It is a set of maps that show water availability, where the fauna is, where the hiking trails are, where public lands are, so that you can better plan how your development might be affected either within the county or within the city. And it's information that normally you might have had to pay for or make a public records request for. So this group has organized the information, pulled it all together, and made it available to the public so that those that want to utilize it for either nonprofit work, for protection work, or for development work have the opportunity to have access to all the same information that the counties or the cities might already have or a private organization might have. So please take advantage of it. It might reduce your costs when you're looking to do development. Finally, I would like to, given the discussion of turning down the opportunity to tax, I would like to bring back the discussion of requesting a community benefit plan be added to the application process for cannabis industries, because I know that those that are looking to come in here would like to contribute to the community, and if they're not going to be taxed, they have supported the concept of a community benefit plan, and that would be added to the application process historically.
Okay, I think with that request, we'll need a second and a third. So, and I will second that. Ask a question to Councilor, or Teresa Gallivan.
I mean, this is where the horse has left the stall on this. We've already got applications that have been out. We've already got the whole process started. So, I mean, I think it would be a little late to go and redact on this with people that have already put in an application and say, nah, come on back now. We need to add this to it.
Okay, so that fails without a third. Is there anything else?
I'm just wondering if was that a question that you had for me? I mean, we can certainly, if council directs us to do that, we can do that.
It was a statement for me. I mean, if it was something that I would have given it a third gladly if we were still in the development of this application, but I think we're a little bit too far down the trail here to say, hey, come back and let's do this again now, so.
If the council wants to bring it forward, we will do it. We just need council's direction.
So do I have a third? Okay, so that fails without a third. Anything else, Councilmember Osborne? No. Okay, I attended many meetings, none at city expense. Several of them were similar to Councilmember Osborne's, but none at city expense. So this meeting is adjourned to a regular city council meeting, April 3rd at 6:30 p.m. Thank you. Good night.